Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting of December 4th, 2017. We welcome you to our meeting this evening. If you are in our audience this evening and you'd like to have an agenda, they can be found just outside the door on the table to your right. The audience communication forms, if you choose to participate, can be found there also. If you are watching from home and you'd like to follow along with an agenda, they can be found on our website. That is at www.livoniapublicschools.org. If you hover over the Board tab, you can drop down to Agendas and follow along with us this evening. This evening's meeting is a Committee of the Whole meeting, and what that means is that the items that are before the Board this evening will be discussed, very likely at great length with a lot of questions and answers. Perhaps the Board may have additional requests for information from administration, but there will be no votes taken on any items tonight. Any items that the Board determines are ready to go to a vote will be placed on our agenda for a vote on our next regular or voting meeting, which I believe is December 18th. The next item on our agenda this evening is item 2, Committee of the Whole. I do not have any items for Committee of the Whole. Mrs. Oquist, nothing else?
I do not, President Burton.
All right, thank you. The next item on our agenda this evening is item 3, Curriculum Committee, and I will turn the meeting over to Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, President Burton. Tonight we have one item on the agenda. It's the Niji Japanese Immersion Elementary School Program, and our presenter is going to be Mrs. Cindy Scott. Welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited tonight to be able to put this out for our TV audience. Something that we have talked about at a couple of our study sessions is Niji and where they have been and where they have come in the few short years that they've been a part of Livonia Public Schools. So I'm just going to kind of review some of the things that we have talked about thus far. At the very first year for Niji Japanese Immersion Elementary School to be a part of Livonia Public Schools was in the fall of 2014. They opened with 125 students in grades K through 4. Grade 5 was added in the year 2015-16. This school year in 17-18 they have 256 students in grades K through 5, and this is an increase of 131 students within a 4-year period. Niji continues to grow not only in student numbers, but also in passion and investment to create a unique educational opportunity for both Japanese and American students to be immersed in a second language. The students become bilingual, respectful, and globally minded individuals. Superintendent Oquist and I have had conversations with parents at school events and here at Central Office who are very desirous of continuing to expand Niji to 6th grade. In the midst of those conversations, we have had conversations with lead administrator of Niji Lawrence DeLuca. It was determined to conduct a survey during the parent-teacher conferences this fall in October to the current 5th grade families to see what their interest was in having Niji have a 6th grade. And 22 of the 29 5th grade students welcomed the opportunity to stay at Niji for 6th grade. And so therefore we would love to propose adding 6th grade to Niji for the 2018-19 school year.
Oh, great. I'm on a delay. Does anybody have any questions or? No, Mrs. Oquist.
I'll just thank you, Mrs. Scott, and thanks for that background on Niji. As you know, this question has come up over the past couple of years, and as Mrs. Scott has shared, some of the considerations that we had to take a look at were the curriculum development at that grade level, determining assessments, material procurement, et cetera. And so it's a pretty complex factor. In addition to, as Mrs. Scott shared, how many students we would potentially have moving on. And so we really have a cohort of students now in the 5th grade that would allow us to have a relatively full, quote-unquote, class at the 6th grade level, which makes it a more financially viable option for us to recommend to you. And we also, Mrs. Scott has worked very, very closely with our lead administrator there and the staff, as well as Mrs. O'Brien, our chief academic officer, and feel that we are in a position to be able to give that time and attention to the development of that curriculum and material selection for the 6th grade. So it really, I think with some of the feedback we also received from the parents had to do with the fact that this is really a pivotal year with regard to making that determination of if they may conclude their time here in Livonia Public Schools and return back to their home district. Many districts have grades 6 through 8 as their middle school. And so this was a time where we wanted to bring that information to the board, and Mrs. Scott really started on this back in September, studying that for the feasibility for the coming year, so that we could allow parents ample time to be able to make that determination for their family. And so after, many weeks of study, in addition to the past couple of years, we are pleased to bring this recommendation to you, and we would really enjoy seeing the opportunity to have Niji-Iro grow to the initial ideal when it was first created to become a K-6 school.
Great. Does anybody have any questions? President Burton.
Just a comment for the benefit of the public. Niji-Iro also brings in a great number of students from outside of the Livonia Public School District, which we have been doing on a very careful and monitored basis. But having the students from the surrounding school districts participating in this allows us not to only to stay an offering for them, but for Livonia Public Schools students. So it's a good thing all around.
Do we pull from, is it about 16 neighboring communities?
$20.
20.
Oh, wow.
This was this year's count. So, yes. And some, there's 4 of those that we only pull 1 from, but those are pretty far away. So they make a long trek to bring their children to Niji-Iro each morning and pick them up in the evening.
And we know that the school receives, or the district receives, multiple calls per week, not only from this area, this region, but really from Japan as well, as families are making a determination when they may be assigned to this area for work. One of the things that we've done is advertise in Japanese publications and newspapers, as well as with many of our corporations that bring native Japanese speakers to the United States. And so we also know that many folks are making the determination on where to live, et cetera, when they come here, based on whether or not they are able to secure a spot of enrollment at Niji-Iro. And just recently, Mr. DeLuca, students from Niji-Iro, and a staff member and a couple of parents, and Mrs. Jenkins joined a delegation from the city of Livonia to meet with representatives from Japan to share information about Niji-Iro and to talk about the economic opportunities here in this area, as well as the educational and lifestyle opportunities. And so we're very pleased to continue to offer this unique learning environment, one of only 4 or 5 in the country of its nature. So
That's great. President Burton.
There's, as you mentioned, there are a number of students whose families come from Japan, and they may be here for a period of time. There are also a number of families who have some Japanese heritage in their family and choose to participate. And there are also a good number of families who have no Japanese background whatsoever, but wish to put their children into a dual language immersion school.
Yes.
So it really is a unique combination of students that are there.
It is. You've described it perfectly, and that really is the beauty of the school, is that you have families who share that passion for a dual immersion education, but may come at it from many different points of view, and the staff really has just done a remarkable job.
Great. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Scott, if we go this route and we put on the 6, how is that going to affect our staffing?
It will increase our staffing, and so therefore I've also had conversations with Mr. McDonald, and then of course with Mr. DeLuca about beginning that process very quickly. so that then we can get it out there. But Mr. DeLuca just shared with me that he's already had 3 people call to inquire about a position at NEJI. So word's out there that there are possibilities, and we just got through filling one, and so he already had kind of a little bit of a bank. And then, like I said, 3 more calls came in just within the last couple of weeks. So we're knocking on wood that it won't be a problem, for us too. But you don't know. Sometimes some of our staff ends up being called back to Japan, or their plans change. So we just have to keep searching. So, yeah.
Thank you.
President Burton.
And we do have enough income with these students in order to cover our costs, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Scott.
Thank you.
That's exciting news. Oh,
We all set?
that concludes our curriculum committee for
Okay.
tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members also, just make note, I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the meeting, our IT folks have asked that we be conscious of the fact that we need to speak pretty closely to our microphones tonight.
Okay.
So just be
Okay.
aware of that.
You should.
The next item on our agenda this evening is item 4, Finance Committee, and I'm going to be turning over the meeting to Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you, President Burton. We have 2 items on our agenda tonight. We have the 2017-18 first budget amendment and also the summer tax resolution. And Mrs. Smith is here to help us with these discussions.
Thank you very much. To start, you have before you the budget book that contain all the different funds, and on top of that is also a 1-page summary of the changes to the general fund. So I'd like to start there with you tonight. On the sheet of paper, in the first column, we see our proposed budget. That was what we started working on last spring and what was taken to the board and approved in June. And then in the second column is the proposed, or the first amended budget we're proposing for your approval. We expected an ending fund balance this year of $14.1 million. And then back in October, when we were going over our financial audit and taking the time to compare our budget from 16-17 to how we actually did, it was during that time we noticed, or we knew that we'd realize a positive budget variance because our revenues came in a little higher and the expenditures came in a little lower. So to start off, for 17-18, we have a $2.7 million adjustment that starts us off in our beginning fund balance for the 17-18 school year. So that's the first adjustment that's been made to the budget. And then back in June, when we were working on the budget, I pulled our last financial update from June to see what we discussed. And in there, we made note that there were a few things that we were not including in the proposed budget. One of them being potential MIPSERS reform, and the second one also potential increase in at-risk funding. And so now we're taking the time to adjust that budget now that we do have more information about both those figures. So again, we're starting off with the fund balance, what we thought would be $14.1 million, adding in the $2.7 million because we ended the year better last year. The next item on here is salaries. So our salaries for this first budget amendment, I am lowering $1.7 million. And to explain what that variance is, during our proposed budget, we budgeted for 25 teacher retirements, and we've in June recognized 26 retirements. But what we didn't include in our budget is an additional 7 retirements that have taken place since then. Additionally, we've had 19 parapros leave or retire or resign since June, 6 secretaries, and 3 administrators. So oftentimes when we have the staff turnover, they may be on the higher end of their pay scales and they're being replaced with somebody lower on that scale. So we're able to recognize that savings in our general fund budget. The next line item is estimated taxes abated or written off. And during our analysis of the final budget to actual expenditures last year, we were able to recognize some savings for that. And so we've recognized that the last couple of years. So we were able to adjust what we are anticipating for this year down by $200,000. So adjusted the budget for that. The next line item, we are recognizing an additional $300,000 of at-risk funding. That would be an additional revenue into the general fund. The next line item is another $300,000 of various revenue line items, so just spread across local, state, and other sources. And then the next two groupings on this sheet are things that have an impact on the revenue and the expenditures when you see the changes from the initial budget, but the net impact of them is zero. So that means, yes, we might be getting additional revenue, but we also have additional expenditures. So we're not realizing any additional revenues that we could be spending. So the first thing are the least restrictive environment aids, also known as independence parapros. That isn't a new expenditure to the district. Those were formerly being charged to our special education fund, where our center programs are charged, and technically those aren't part of our center program. So what I'm trying to do here is keep the special education fund only for the center program. What we were doing was charging the independence parapros to the special ed fund because we're getting county revenue for that, so it made sense to keep the county revenue together. But at the end of the year, when we're doing our final reports for the special education fund, that was always something that we manually had to back out as a reconciling item so that we could tie to what we were submitting as final reports to the county. So what I'm proposing in our first budget amendment is moving the parapro salary and benefits out of the special education fund, moving them into the general fund, but then also moving the county revenue from the special education fund over the general fund. And also, we wouldn't have to do a transfer that we've historically had to do, and I'll explain the reason for the transfer. Our special education costs, we submit a cost report at the end of each school year, and we get some reimbursement for the state. And so that revenue comes into the general fund, and then it's done as a transfer to the special education fund. So it's an expenditure in the general fund and then a credit in the special education fund. Now that we're recognizing the the parapros in the general fund, we don't have to do that transfer anymore. So we have some additional expenditure, but we also have additional revenue. So that's a net effective zero on our general fund.
So may I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
These have always been ultimately charged out to the general fund when you reconcile the budget at the end of the year.
Correct.
It was just not initially in the budgets as proposed?
Correct.
Okay.
Kind of
So this
similar-
isn't a new charge to the general fund, that they've always ultimately come out of the general fund?
Correct.
But that transfer was made at the end of the year, where we're starting the year including those in. Will that be the case moving forward?
Yes.
So then we won't have to make the end of the year adjustment?
Correct.
Okay, so they have always been charged to the general ed fund ultimately, and we're continuing to do that, but we're starting that at the beginning of the year rather than making an adjustment at the end of the year?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Clarifying questions on that? I want to make sure
Yeah.
everybody's
No,
on
that makes sense.
It's
the
just an
same page.
accounting.
It is, and it's a net zero, but I just want to make sure we're all clear on that.
Okay, are you all
Yep.
set? Okay.
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
So the independence parapros, they're people that are not in the center program, they're,
Actually, I know Jen will be able to speak better to that than me, but it's my understanding we submit an application to the county for students so that they can be in their least restrictive environment. And so these are parapros that get assigned to an individual student, and they are with them throughout the day.
mainstream.
Yep.
One-to-one? So, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, our independence paraprofessionals could be for our students who are in general education classes that require additional assistance that have IEPs.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, these are our non-center Act 18 programs.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Sorry for the walk.
She was ready, always ready.
Always ready.
The last item you'll see on this sheet is the benefits. We had an increase in our benefits in the general fund of $2.6 million, but that's also offset by additional MIPSERS money from the state, the Section 147C, if you recall that from the last couple years. So we have an additional $2.6 million worth of revenue, but we also have an additional $2.6 million worth of expenditure. So that's really that flow-through money from the state. They put it into our state aid payment, but then we get an invoice from the Office of Retirement
turn around
Services
and
and
give it
then
back.
turn it right back over to them. So nothing additional that the general fund can use, for providing services, but it is something that will impact, when we look at our revenues and expenditures, you can see the revenues are up, the expenditures are up as well, but the net effect is, for this particular item, that we don't have any new money that we're able to spend. So that's just a summary. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, we'll jump into the budget book and go over each one of the funds.
Can you just check your pluses?
I'll explain it actually, because
Because is it, all right.
Yeah.
That's fine.
on your sheet,
I know.
it starts with a proposed fund balance of $4.1 million. You add in $2.7 million, and then you add in 1.7. On the sheet, it's reflected as a negative 1.7 because it's a reduction of expenditures, but a reduction in expenditures is in
an
addition to
increase.
the fund balance. So, same with the taxes abated. It's a negative expenditure, a lowering of expenditures, but that means it's an increase to our general fund. And then an additional 0.3 for the at-risk funding, and then an additional, $300,000 or 0.3 million, an additional $300,000 for various line items. So that's what gets you to our new first amended ending fund balance of $19.2 million.
For the general lay reader,
Yeah.
you may want to
Make a note on there?
Or make it, either that or just make it add up.
Yeah.
Because it does, I had to look at it a couple times, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, they're negative.
Yeah, because a decrease
I get
in
it.
expenditure is.
But when you go to foot it, it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As
Actually,
an outside person looking at it, it looks like a negative. and
That's a
so-
perfect suggestion. I'll make a footnote on the bottom.
Okay, that'll
of
work.
the
Because I think that
narrative to
kind
the
of
math.
throws people off when you just can't foot it down.
Add it down the road, yeah. Yeah,
So,
that makes
okay.
sense.
Thank you. Great
Mrs.
point.
Burton.
Just a comment about the MIPSers. This is an example then of the money that folks in Lansing can say they're putting more money into education, and yet it is not going into our classroom.
Correct.
So this is money that comes to us for retirement costs, and we have to turn around and write a check right back out.
Correct.
So this is where the confusion comes in with Lansing saying they're spending more money on education, and yet our school districts are saying we don't have more money for education. That's not coming into our classrooms.
Yep, absolutely correct. And I think, both sides, nobody's, lying. But Lansing sees it as, well, our current retirement rate is about 25%, and they're saying, well, it would be 35% if we didn't give you this extra money. So they're saying they're helping keep the costs down in retirement, but as you said, this is no additional money we have to spend in our classrooms, so it's truly a flow in and a flow out.
And we are thankful for the additional money for the retirement, because it's true, it would be a cost to us as that continues to go up. But there just needs to be clarification when we're having conversations that if you don't understand, this is not money that can be used to educate our children.
Very true.
Okay. Questions? Okay.
Okay, we'll jump into our budget book. Similar format to the proposed budget, what you've seen. Here's the front page. The first page is our resolution for the general fund for the revenues. And this is just breaking out in more detail what we see on that summary page. Proposed budget expected the revenue to be 148.3, and it's now $152.7 million because of the various line items we've just gone through. We've also taken the opportunity to update the beginning fund balance. We were estimating we'd have a fund balance of about $14 million, and we were able to start the year with a $6.7 million fund balance.
Mrs. Bonnefield? Can I
I'm
jump in?
sorry.
That's okay. So the slight increase in the local revenue is the property tax.
This is actually a little property taxes and mostly the center program revenue, the local county, the county revenue being recognized here in the general fund.
Okay.
We are watching the local property taxes though, and you might see that in our next budget amendment. Property taxes, our values are up, so we're watching to see how that will impact our revenues.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll move on to the next page. If that works. The next page is our breakdown of our expenditures for the general fund. And you'll see on the one-page summary, it's a very simplified version. There's changes between each one of the line items or the different categories. But in total, we're looking at expenditures from the proposed budget, what we thought would be $148.2 million is now $150.2 million, so additional $2 million worth of expenditures.
President Burton.
Can you address looks like about a $2 million increase on the very first line item of basic programs, and then a little bit more, $500,000 or so in added needs?
Yep. This is largely due to the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, the
That's what we're
incentives that
hoping.
we've
Okay,
been
good.
putting in place.
Okay. And so that's additional reading supports for our children in our lower grades primarily?
Correct. Yep.
But
We've
also at the
instituted-
secondary level.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep,
Secondary also?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay,
Also instituted a homework club, too.
Mm-hmm.
That's
okay. So thank you to our taxpayers, because that is recently approved tax dollars that money is going directly into some of our most struggling learners.
Mrs. Frank.
And we're calling that kind of program the millage money that we're using, student success. Is that appropriate?
For generally in the elementary grades, we refer to Operation Student Success, and we're enhancing and expanding upon that through some of the supports through the Wayne County Enhancement Millage.
Okay.
At the secondary level, that varies by the individual needs of the school,
Okay.
based on the proposals that they shared with Mr. Archibald, and then subsequently with our cabinet team.
Okay. So Operation Student Success was before the millage?
Yes.
There was some piece, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
You'll also see across these funds, those additional $2.6 million worth of retirement costs. Those are all spread pretty evenly across these functions.
Mr. Centers?
It looks like about a $230,000 decrease in business services. Can you tell, under the support services business, where would that savings be realized? What are we looking at there?
And it's funny because I can see the line item, Dan, and now I'm trying to remember what it actually was. I believe it had to do with, I think this is actually where the recognition of the taxes written off is,
Okay.
which was the $300,000. Yeah, so there
Okay.
might be other, adjustments within there, and actually now I can say with certainty, yes. There's no other category that would fall under. That is definitely under the business category.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And just as a note, please ask anything this evening, and know also that you won't be voting on this until next week. So this is a lot of information, and so Ms. Smith will be going through it in detail this evening. But again, if you have questions beyond tonight that arise as you review this in preparation for the meeting, please don't hesitate, and then we'll get the responses back to all of you in your board update on Thursday.
You'll see another large change on this sheet is towards the bottom that transfers to other funds, going from the 2.58 down to 1.58. That's that transfer that we no longer have to do to the special education fund.
For the paraprofessional.
Mrs. Frank, you had a question.
Just in terms of instruction, and I think that you covered this well, it's not that we're not, as people retire, that we're not filling their positions. It's that as people come in to fill positions, we're not short-staffed, if is
Correct.
that what you're saying? That as people, they're just, their salary is not as high.
Yep,
Okay.
that's correct.
Anybody else? Okay, Mrs. Smith?
By far, the general fund is definitely our bigger one, biggest fund that we have, but moving on, we'll go through the rest of the funds we have. The next page is our funded projects fund. As we made note last year, when we do our final year-end report, this really truly is part of the general fund. We as a district, for presentation purposes and tracking purposes, have put it into a separate fund, but it's, they're considered general fund programs. They're instructional, but it looks like a big change, but this is, when we're putting our budget together, we don't have our program allocations yet, and so now we have all of our program allocations for the 17-18 school year, and we're able to adjust the budget accordingly. And this is one of those funds where the revenues always equal the expenditures. We detail out the different grants that we have down below, our largest grant being the IDEA grant to support our special education costs. Second largest would be Title I to help our at-risk students. Nothing, no major changes here other than now we have program allocation information, so you can see an increase in revenue and expenditures.
Mrs. Bird, President Burton.
So the on the third line, or second line from the top, under revenue, the state, that we saw the large jump in.
Mhm.
Can you talk to me about that?
Sure.
That looks like a big jump to me, but that's the programs that you're talking about that were then plugged into that?
Yeah, because if you, what is, I think, helpful to look at is the first column of information is our actual expenditures for last year. So actual expenditures, or revenue, I'm sorry, from the state last year was $2 million. And so we didn't have a lot of program information before we did the proposed budget. So you can see it was down to $1 million, and now our first amended is actually $1.8 million. So the $1.8 million is very in line with the $2 million where we actually ended last year.
And that slight decrease would be because of some of the staffing in those programs that would be?
Most likely some of the funds maybe that we still haven't had yet. I know like there's been changes to like that section 35A, the early literacy grant. That's just different funding changes from the state from year to year. So not that they're necessarily not funding one program anymore, but it could change. Maybe there's more pupils that the funds have to be spread across throughout the state. So nothing really significant. I know one thing of note was the Bulkhead Funds. We get reimbursement for added costs incurred at the Livonia Career and Technical Center, and we did have a decrease in expenditures, a decrease in allocation from the state, I know from this year. But we have, ample time. Joe Anderson, the principal there, works very closely with the staff to come up with budgets too, so they had ample time to adjust their spending plan for this year.
Additionally, with regard to some of those grants, like the aforementioned grants, some of those are awarded at different times during the year, and so they may not have been realized by the time this first budget amendment was made, but perhaps by the time we have our second budget amendment, they may be made. Sometimes a grant may allocate 85% of the grant funding and not release the final allocation until they have a final determination of how many pupils for whom that grant would serve. And then they'll readjust your grant and give you the remaining dollars at the end of the calendar year. And so that may still be yet adjusted, but will likely be close to that actual revenue realized last year.
Okay, move on to the next page. The top half of the page is our athletic fund, and from there too, I think again what would be helpful is looking at our actual compared to the amended. We can see the expenditures going from $2,015,000 to $2,075,000. A good chunk of that is the additional retirement costs and also some health insurance costs, that have gone up this year. So we'll see additional costs on the athletic director and coaches line. Contracted services, very similar. We ended the year at $589,000. We're budgeting for $599,000. And then supplies, equipment, and miscellaneous, a little bit of a jump there. We had to recently do, I believe it was a gymnasium floor.
The gymnastics floor.
Gymnastics
Is that
floor.
correct, Mr. Archibald?
The athletic,
The gymnastics floor at, was it redone at Churchill?
Yes.
Yeah, so,
Yes, it's still in process.
so we've included that in our budget. Food service fund.
Mrs. Smith, can I,
Sure.
sorry, does this include any of the new activities that we've talked about?
It does not.
Okay.
No.
because that would not be realized until next year, but
Oh,
you
that's
may
right.
see that
That's right.
when the final recommendation comes forth from
Okay.
what I anticipate will be Mr. Willenberg, then we will make that proposal and then adjust the budget accordingly as we propose it for next school year.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Did you want to talk about this at the athletic fund now or at the end?
Oh, yes, thank you for the reminder. The athletic fund is also recognized as part of the general fund when we do our, they call it the financial information database. It's us uploading our ledger to the state of Michigan. And the athletic fund at one point was deemed a special revenue fund, and it no longer is. The GASB, a new GASB came out, government accounting standards boards came out with a change. So long story short, the athletic fund is technically no longer considered a special revenue fund. But we, again, just for transparency's sake, have separated that out and kept it separate. But, in talking this over with our auditors and kind of asking what their recommendation was. They said it isn't wrong for us to leave it in a separate fund, but it would make sense for us to put this back into the general fund. And so that's something that I'd like to discuss with you for maybe the proposed budget, so not a decision we have to make tonight. But one thing that I would like to mention is on the general fund, we list out everything by function, and so the athletic expenditures would be a separate function, so you could still clearly see what we're spending in the athletic program, so those numbers would be clear, they wouldn't be hidden at all, so we don't lose any of that, and we'd at any point be able to run like a profit loss statement on our athletic program to see, what the general fund is, how that is supporting the athletic program. So something just wanted to put out there and kind of get you guys thinking about it to see what your thoughts were on that. So we're always, looking at our processes and making sure that what we're doing is, comparable to what other districts are doing, and also making sure that they align with the accounting standards put out by the state. So it's something to keep in mind.
Mrs. Burton, President Burton.
So, as I'm reading this, it costs about $2 million to run the athletic program, of which almost 50% of that is covered by student pay-to-participate fees and gate receipts.
That's correct.
So the district is actually putting in about $1 million, and the participants participants either on the fields or courts or the fans who are watching are covering the other half of the fees.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Centers.
This question is for Mrs. O'Quist. Do you know what a reasonable is there kind of a guideline on what a school district would, percentage-wise of the general fund budget, would use toward athletics and other extracurriculars? But this specifically, it looks like it's 1.13 million is about 1% of our general fund approximately, right? Is that kind of in line with what other school districts do?
To be honest, Mr. Centers, I'm not certain of that, but I
Yeah.
can certainly ascertain that information. What I will tell you is our costs are very much in line
Okay.
with what we see in other districts. We just recently took a look at things like salary for coaches, some of the contracting that we do through Coach EZ, et cetera.
Sure.
Many of those costs are very much in line. We've had the opportunity, as you know, we're taking a look at some additional opportunities for students via potentially bowling or lacrosse. So as we look at those, we have an opportunity to take a look at use fees and what other districts are paying and are charging for that. So we find we're very much in line with that and with regard to our pay-to-participate fees, et cetera. So I don't believe that any of those would be out of line. I could certainly look at a percentage of total budget in other districts to make that determination. We're a large district. We do have many, many offerings.
Sure.
And we do have a relatively reasonable and a cap on our pay-to-participate fees.
Yeah.
So we do know that in relation to other districts, we're generally in the, would you say, generally in about the bottom third on that, the pay-to-participate fees?
No, with the recent increase, we're probably in the top third now.
Top, okay. So we made,
KLAA.
in the KLA, so we made that modification, I believe, last year.
Last year.
To those
Last year.
fees. And so those are the types of things that we take a look at to see, what some of those going rates are, but I'd be happy to get the answer to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
President Burton.
And along the lines of the pay-to-participate fees, it's a set fee, and then if a student is on a free or reduced lunch, they have two different levels of a reduced pay-to-participate fee. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And I'd be interested too, and I don't know if other board members would support this thought of looking at the other districts and finding out if we're still in line. Like we said, Mrs. Oakland, you just said that we're in about the top third for pay-to-participate fees. Just want to make sure that we're in line with our neighbors and that. I mean, we certainly don't want to see any student unable to play because their family can't afford a fee.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been a concern. It comes up, not a lot, but at least a couple of times a year. Do we have provisions if a student has a situation like that?
We know, certainly we have the mechanism that you mentioned, which is the graduated rate with regard to a student that may have free or reduced lunch status. And then certainly our schools are very cognizant of that, and we encourage families to work closely with our administration when, they may be going through a temporary period of time that may be difficult for their families, so they may not be on that adjusted schedule with regard to the free and reduced. And so certainly our goal is to have as many students participating as possible, part of the reason why we have the family cap, et cetera.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Moving on down to our food service fund. We've updated our beginning fund balance in the First Amendment. You can see the revenues haven't changed very significantly from our proposed budget. You'll see some little shift between support services and transfers to other funds. The transfers to other funds is our indirect cost allocation. I guess it would be the federal government recognizes that there are certain costs that the district incurs that can't directly be charged to the food service fund. For instance, payroll, processing, the business services, human resources, hiring, and training staff and whatnot. So those are indirect costs that the district incurs, so we're allowed to charge a certain amount. I believe it's around 15% for indirect costs. So that's what we're doing here. This is a cost to the food service, and then we're able to transfer that to the general fund and relieve some of the general fund expenditures that have been incurred on behalf of the food service fund. Next page is our special education fund. These are our center programs. So you will see it looks like a big change, but it's what we've discussed in our general fund. So this is a change moving the least restrictive environment or independence parapros out of the special education fund and moving them to the general fund. So as far as our ending fund balance is very in line with what it was in our proposed budget. But you'll see a reduction in revenues and a reduction in expenditures related to moving those aids to the general fund. On the next page is our debt retirement funds. These funds are used to track the collection of taxes that are levied to pay off our debt through the different bonds that we've passed. So you can see we've got the 2013 bond series 1, 2, and then our 2014 refunding. So primarily the changes on here would be updating the beginning fund balance for the 17-18 school year, and then I don't think we made any changes, maybe a few minor changes to interest income. So other than that, no big changes here. Next page is our capital projects fund. We actually have 4. The 4th is on the next page. We have our sinking fund, our technology fund, capital projects fund, sinking fund. I believe it was at our last committee meeting, maybe back in October, November. We were going through some of the projects that we are estimating for the sinking fund out of the sinking fund dollars. So I've adjusted the expenditures accordingly. Technology fund, no big changes. We haven't spent a lot out of there. Last year, you can see our expenditures last year was only $50,000. And what we're kind of thinking this will be useful for is, as we're buying this technology out of the bond fund, as those things, for instance, the Chromebooks, start to wear out and we need to replace them, we'll have these funds here that we are able to purchase those technology equipment pieces out of. So. Capital Projects Fund, you may recall at the end of the year we used part of our indirect costs from the Special Education Fund and put them here in this Capital Projects Fund for additional work at Garfield for the Work Skills Program. And it's been going very well using the funds for that. We've also included in our first amended budget another transfer of $500,000 from the general fund from various indirect costs we've been able to collect from other funds. And the idea being we'd be able to use this for some of the projects that we haven't been able to cover through the bond or through the sinking fund. We have plenty of projects and not enough funds, so this is just a little savings for us to be able to get to some of those projects.
And that's really in those last 2 funds, that really is the goal, as Ms. Smith and I have been looking at this, is to take the opportunity to build up a bit of a fund balance in both the technology fund, which we've thankfully not had to tap for the past couple of years because of the bond fund, but as we know, once those funds have been expended and we've put all this technology in, there's certainly going to be a time where we need to replace that. And so if you look at that total of $650,000, while that certainly sounds like a lot of money, if you're looking at replacement in a district our size, we would certainly need to continue to bolster that, and then same with the capital projects fund. So while we are in the mode of working through the bond for many of these expenditures, we will certainly realize by the end of 2019 that most of those funds will have been expended. And so we want to be able to be thinking ahead and be able to put aside some of these dollars so that we can carefully plan for a replacement cycle on some of these items that will have become part of our everyday life and everyday use. And without that fund to go back to, we'll be relying on what will seem like a relatively small technology fund. So, as you see that, we're going to continue to monitor that over the course of this year. And if we're able to add a bit more in either of those funds, we'd like to do that at this point in time so that we're more secure as we move into the next couple of years.
Mrs. Brink.
Did you tell us what that, and maybe I missed it, the technology equipment was, the 100,000?
That's simply getting the authorization for the board for making technology purchases. It's not something that we have set yet, any plans to spend it, but it gives us the authorization that if we need to make some purchases that aren't, budgeted for in the bond, that we'd be able to make them out of this fund.
Okay.
So I believe last year, we had a similar budget of $150,000 for expenditures, and we spent 50 of it. So it's not necessarily, not that we'll necessarily spend the 150, but it's getting the approval from the board if we needed to, that we could.
And I'm not sure who this question is for, but just a question of when you brought up Chromebooks. Do we have plans to make another large purchase of Chromebooks? Where are we? You can get back to us if in the notes this week. In elementary, are we three kids per one Chromebook, 5 kids?
We're closer to about, did we lose Tammy and Phil?
1 to 2.
Okay.
About 1 to 2.
I think we're closer to about 2 to 1.
Okay.
So about a notebook for about every 2 students.
Okay.
Is
and
where
is that kind of our goal?
We
We're
still
not
have a
planning
plan
to-
for 1 additional purchase.
Okay.
And so, again, the goal was not necessarily to be at a 1-to-1.
Okay.
But we certainly, we went from about a 4-to-1, I believe, to about a 2-to-1.
Okay.
And so we do have 1 additional purchase planned.
Out of the bond.
Mhm.
Okay.
Along that line, are we still utilizing those Chromebooks on a cart basis as needed, as opposed to they're parked in any one individual classroom?
That's been a building-based decision, and so at some of our schools, they're based out of a department. At other schools, some of those carts have been broken up, and they go back onto the cart for charging, but they primarily reside within a classroom, a certain number of them. And so that has been a building-based decision with the principal and staff to determine how to best utilize that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then finally, on our last
Sorry.
page,
I was just thinking in terms of Chromebooks, it's also important to remember that the LPS Education Foundation has provided Chromebooks to many classrooms.
Okay. Thank you.
okay. On our final page, we have the last 3 funds, top being the 2013 bond fund. No changes in revenue or expenditure projections. What has been updated is our beginning fund balance based on where we ended last year. Next fund, scholarship fund, no changes there other than adjusting the beginning fund balance. And then the last fund is our health and welfare fund. This is where we pay our insurance invoices out of this fund. The revenues come in the form of employee contributions through payroll, or sometimes they're buying up in their insurances. Also transfers from other funds. So as we expense out the health insurance cost to the various funds, such as the general fund, that's a debit to those funds, and then it's a credit as an incoming revenue to the health and welfare fund. We're maintaining or projecting to maintain about a $1.7 million fund balance in here, and we do want to continue to maintain the fund balance here, in here that does give us some flexibility and some safeguards. One of the things, we've moved away from being self-funded for health insurance, but we're currently still self-funded when it comes to workers' comp. So we pay bills as they're incurred. So, in case we do have a unfortunate year, we do have the savings here that we'd be able to pay for that without having to make a hit to the general fund.
Questions? Any questions in general? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Oh, Mrs. Frank.
On, going back to the beginning at the front page, substitute costs, where would that be? Is that under general school administration instruction? Where would that be?
That falls under whatever function that sub is filling in for. So typically you'd see that under the basic programs. Basic programs are your elementary, middle school, high school, summer school. Added needs would be special education as well as the compensatory education, like at-risk, additional supports. So wherever the staff is that they're subbing for, that would be where the cost is. You might also see that under the under the instructional staff, for instance, for release time, teachers going to professional development or to do like data dives, that type of thing. So it's across a couple different functions.
Okay.
Thank you. Good. All right, thank you. And then, remind us, we're voting on the First Amendment at the December 18th meeting, correct?
Please, yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bonnefield, I did have one other question. Mrs. Smith, I noticed it said that we amend 2 to 3 times per year. We will be doing a quarterly amendment, is that correct?
I'm glad you brought that up. I actually, I'd be happy to do it as often as the board would like me to do. I did poll the Wayne County School business officials during your monthly meeting to get a feel for how often do people make budget amendments. We are by far the outliers. Most districts, like there were only 3 of us that amend it twice during the year and then do a final amendment. Most districts do a first amendment in December or January and then a final amendment in June. And the idea being, the purpose of your budget amendment are really for any significant changes. So, for instance, this budget, we now know our student counts. We now know the funding from the state. We have a bulk of that information. So, for February, March, where we've done that in the past, we don't typically have a lot more, and not a ton more information that would be significant necessarily to do a budget amendment. So, most districts tend to wait and do that in your June amendment. One benefit, I think why maybe we as a district have done that in the past, I know we've used the second amendment done normally in the spring, like around March, as a base for our proposed budget for the following year. But what I did for our budget this year was used our final budget amendment anyway, as a base for our proposed budget. So that is an added value for me, but if the board would like to see that, I'd be happy to do it. Or if you'd like, we could bring financial updates maybe throughout the second semester to keep you abreast of any changes and maybe hold off the formal amendment until June. So to jump back to your original question, yes, as a district, we've historically done 2 amendments and then a final amendment. But most districts tend to do 1 amendment and then a final amendment. So something for us to consider as well.
Do you guys
So if you want to think on that, we'd be happy to talk about that at our January 8th study session, if that would be helpful. So, again, we can certainly continue with that process where we talk about it in February, and you generally vote on a budget amendment in March, then we bring the final one in June. And again, that really has kicked off the budget planning season normally. We could certainly still do that with or without a formal budget amendment. So if there's any other information that you would like Ms. Smith to bring as we talk, as we share that discussion. Most importantly, whether or not it's a formal budget amendment or not, one of the things we'd like to continue to doing as Ms. Smith did last year was to continuously bring a bit more detailed budget updates on a regular basis throughout second semester as we begin planning for the budget process. So that really is the key. More than anything, is that we are able to discuss any of those variances and really begin to almost have that preliminary discussion, which, believe it or not, we're already starting to do now as we look toward planning for next year. So, and part of that is what I shared with you about some of the, quote, savings accounts in some of those other areas. It's really not just for next year, but looking
down the
looking
road.
ahead a couple of years, so.
Guys, good? We can talk a little bit
Yeah.
about maybe a format change or still bring financial information, but just change sort of the way it looks. Okay, any other questions on the amendment?
No.
Okay, then we are going to move on to the summer tax resolution.
Not so exciting. This one is normally something that comes to the board. It normally gets put on the consent agenda item. But in essence, what it is, Michigan compiled law requires that we pass a resolution that then we notify the cities or municipalities of our intention to continue to do a summer tax levy. So here, we do a 50% summer levy and then a 50% winter levy. So this is nothing new other than updating the dates on the resolution, same as last year. But it gives us the authorization to work with our cities to do our summer tax levy.
Questions?
No, I think that's great.
All good?
Is that something we typically put on regular agenda?
Consent, usually.
Yep,
I
last
think
year
we
it was
put it on consent.
I think we put it on consent.
Yep.
yeah.
That's great.
I'm fine with consent.
Okay. Mrs. Smith, do you have anything else for us?
I don't.
Okay, then that will conclude Finance, President Burke.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is item 5, Building and Site, and I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. We have 4 items, and Mr. Francis is here.
Mr. Scott Smith from Plant Moran Crest is going to join me on letter A, I should say, agenda item for the parking lots out of the sinking fund, that discussion, Mr. Johnson.
All right. Present away.
Well, that sounds like fun. So, you all have in your packet the information. You have my memo along with the Plant Moran Crest memo, which included a bid tab for Franklin, Roosevelt, Stevenson, and also the NTH Consultants letter. So we've discussed on a few different occasions, and as recently as our last study session meeting, regards to we're going to be doing the summer of 18's sinking fund paving projects in 2 phases. So this is phase 1 that we want to discuss. We have the bid amounts and the recommendations. We'll do this, and then you can expect us to come back again with phase 2 once we have gone over the drawings, taken it out to bid, et cetera, et cetera. At this point, I think I can turn it over to Mr. Smith just to give you a little bit of an outline of what we're doing, but keeping in mind that this is not our entire planned project for the summer. This is a portion of it, but going to be finishing off Stevenson, going to be finishing off Franklin, doing the bus loop there, and at Stevenson, the back lot near the fields, and then Roosevelt's actually going to get. If you recall, we had a traffic study done. We had some concerns with the buses backing up and stacking on Linden, et cetera. So we did a study there. Also, the change of programs a couple years ago with bringing the ASD program into Roosevelt. So we have a whole new plan with regard to how the parking lots are going to enter, exit, new configuration. But that's from the study that was done, the traffic study that was conducted. But also, the lot needed redoing regardless of the change in configuration. The lot just needed many repairs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Smith. I'll give you a chance to do a little overview, then we can take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Good evening.
Good evening.
As Mr. Francis stated, this is really phase 1. Phase 2 will be Cooper, and then we're also looking at 3 elementary schools that have received kind of some changes as a result of curriculum. Buchanan, Grant, and Randolph. Actually, we're meeting this Friday to look at some potential options relates to those, the parking lots there and the potential for adding additional spaces. So Cooper and those 3 sites are kind of the phase 2 part of this that will come back next year and present to you all. So this one, again, focused on Franklin, Roosevelt, and Stevenson. Franklin was the bus loop, so it's the pavement, but it's a lot of concrete in there too. A lot of that concrete around that canopy is in very poor repair. So we're going to fix all of that. The canopy itself, that's been deemed to have a significant value here within the school, so that will stay, but the concrete around it, the curbing will be replaced. At Roosevelt, again, that's pretty much the whole lot. We'll be doing the bus loop and then the 2 other student lots, redoing the whole system, redoing the base, regrading it, helping the drainage. A lot of that drainage right now slopes right into Henry Ruff, up and over, so we're trying to get that tied into the storm structure, storm sewer system, so that it doesn't keep draining over the grass and into Henry Ruff. We've got a better solution in place there. We are also, if you guys have been to Roosevelt, we've got a lot of issues with traffic cones and students crossing and traffic from buses and also from parents. We've brought that area up and gave them a dedicated walkway in a couple places where they can cross safely. We'll get rid of the cones, and this is a plan we've reviewed with Mr. Green several times. He's very excited about it. The traffic study also was a big factor in what we ended up doing there. That coupled with the fact that the lots needed repair in the first place. That's why this is probably the biggest project. We'll probably need most of the summer to do that work. The other ones I think will go much quicker. We really don't have a schedule per se. We're going to kind of combine it with Phase 2 and see who the contractors are, see how we can sequence that out. But Roosevelt and Cooper will be the big projects for this summer. The other ones will be kind of smaller and probably won't take nearly the same amount of time. Stevenson itself, most of those are areas of the lot that are in poor repair that we're fixing. There's some grading areas that will improve. That's really the scope at Stevenson. In terms of this project, we bid this out here in the month of November. On the 21st of November, we took bids. We had 2 bidders, Best Asphalt and Nagel Paving. These are companies that have done most of the sinking fund work, pavement replacement work over the last 3 summers. They both attended a walkthrough, had a chance to familiarize themselves with the sites. The way we looked at it, each project could be awarded separately based on a low bid. In this case, Nagel Paving was the low bidder at each site respectively. So the recommendation is for Nagel Paving for all 3 schools. The combined bid totaling $997,360. We recommend, and we have been recommending, about a 15% contingency for this scope of work because you're dealing with the site. There's a lot of unforeseens. Could be undercutting, could be some poor soils. We're covering a large square footage area, so we wanted to make sure that we had some money in there to handle those unforeseen conditions should they exist. A lot of that you won't know until you physically strip the existing asphalt off. If you get a wet summer, sometimes that precipitates additional costs with the undercutting and the schedule. Sometimes you don't have the liberty to wait for everything to dry if you're trying to get it put back in place. So that's been our standard over the last couple summers, the 15% contingency. So all in with the hard construction costs and the contingency, we're recommending a total project award of $1,147,360. Again, you can see the bid tabulation towards the back. That'll be the last sheet. Again, we had 2 bidders. They were about $150,000 apart. Again, both very qualified bidders. And results came in right around where we expected them to be with the latest budget estimates. So, any questions?
Questions? President Burton.
You mentioned that this 15% has been rather standard contingency. Over the last few years, how much of that have we delved into and how much has come back to the district? I mean, not to the penny certainly, but I mean, just in a ballpark, are we usually utilizing most of that, or is most of it coming back to us, or somewhere in the middle?
I would say it's somewhere probably in the middle, to be honest. Each site has been different. I'm trying to think last year where we hit some problems. Franklin had some areas. Holmes had a few areas. Actually, last year Hoover had a lot of undercutting that we had to deal with. Buchanan did not. I don't have the exact figures, but you know, we have, to my knowledge, we have not exceeded that contingency at this point.
Okay.
We can go back and look.
I don't need great detail on it. I just a ballpark of, you know, counting on it all coming back to us or counting on every penny being gone, and I didn't think either extreme was probably correct,
right.
but...
And we look at it as as you see on the cost summary, in whole. So you could have, out of multiple parking lot programs that we're working on, or projects, one could be taking up more than its own fair share, but the others could have come in better. So we do look at it as one overall contingency. But we could go back and take a look at the summer projects and just get you at least a rounded number.
Just a very,
of what those contingencies have come out as.
a very ballpark. I certainly am not
Okay.
asking for a ton of detail on it, just an idea of how it's looking.
Yeah, we should be able to get that for you. We're still, there's a couple of lingering change orders from this past summer that we're wrapping up, but we should have a very clear picture and give you kind of a ballpark of what it looks like from last year. Or this past summer.
For Nagel, you said, or for the bids, you said that there were two bidders. Nagel won all of the bids. You stated that the two were, was it Cooper and Roosevelt are the two big
But Cooper's in the
projects.
second phase.
Yeah. So my question is one, I'm assuming you've spoken to Nagel and they have the proper bandwidth, the coverage to make all
Nagel's
those.
huge.
My second question then is if we have a second round of paving that we're gonna send out for bid, and there were only two bidders, are we gonna have a lack of coverage? Not that it changes, bandwidth is bandwidth, but when they send out the bid packages, are we gonna get enough coverage on that second round of bids? Is Nagel are they big enough to have the bandwidth?
Nagel's very
to
big,
co-
they could handle it. Mr. Lau actually made contact with Best as well after the bidding was done, just to reach out, and because they've done plenty of work with the district as well. They were very, very pleased with the contact, and we're talking about being interested in bidding in phase 2 as well. These companies aren't deterred. There's gonna be a lot of work in the summer here and in other places,
Okay.
but I'll let you speak to it as well, but I wouldn't be uncomfortable even if Nagel came in as low in the second round, but
Okay.
all bets are off. Everybody's fair game. It's a new bid.
Okay, and I know we talked about, we've got 3 months, there's only so much work we can get done in the summer.
Yeah,
and-
we've got full summer, that's for
And
sure.
we want to get the second phase to you as quickly as possible. So
We
we're
are
working on that now, and we hope in January to be able to bring to you the recommendations for the next, so that we can get in the queue
Yep.
for that summer
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So that's certainly our intent. We would have liked to have done it together, but what we didn't want to do was hold back these projects that were ready to go, because as you recall, we added on the study of Buchanan, Grant, and Randolph, and quite frankly, Cooper just needed some additional clarification and determination before we were ready to bring it. So we discussed whether or not it would, behoove us to wait and bring that all at one time. And I think Plant Moran felt that this was really the best time to come if we were ready to go with phase 1. But really, it's a good question, because it's some of the same things that we talked about, which is, looking at the coverage, looking at the capacity, and when we get in the queue with our requests, so.
Okay, and can I have another, question? Can you just talk a little bit, I know we're talking about these big projects, and usually there's a lot of concern that there's never enough we can never come up with enough parking, or, the traffic flows. Just a little short description for the community why we can't just go in and lay pavement, and, we've talked about before how we can kind of reconfigure it, but to take any open land and start adding parking lots and stuff, why that doesn't necessarily work when, sometimes the comments are, well, why don't you just, pave the back lot or pave that field or something, and why we're not able to do that when we're doing these huge paving projects.
Certainly. When you're pretty much going one-for-one replacement, your permitting process is really streamlined. You may have you'll certainly have soil erosion permitting. If you're in the right-of-way, you'll have those sort of permits. And your plan review is much, again, streamlined. If you look at Roosevelt, for example, we're making changes that won't look exactly the same, but where we took some, we added some, and vice versa. And I think the net there is we actually decreased the area slightly. but generally it was a one-for-one replacement of the area. When we look to increase it, then it really triggers a lot more in terms of the review. You have impervious area now that requires, that collects water much more quicker than, grass or any other kind of landscaped area. And that water runs off much faster, and you have to treat it in many instances. A lot of times that requires you to detain or retain that stormwater in some fashion, whether it be a detention pond or some sort of underground network of large pipes, which can be expensive and also be, a maintenance type of activity for the district. So that's something that we are looking for that will impact potentially Randolph, Grant, and Buchanan. I think at Randolph currently, one of the options is to try and utilize maybe something with the restriping of the lot and try to become more efficient with it and pick up spaces that way. Buchanan's somewhere in the middle where we're looking to maybe add a small lot by the playgrounds in the front of the school. And Grant, I would say, probably is the most tricky of all, and that gets into some ownership rights of we've got some different options on how to get another exit out of that parking lot. But depending on, the ownership and how that, I believe some of that area was deeded over to the city for park rights in the past, so those are things we have to look at.
We have ownership rights at Buchanan with regard to the in-out. Everybody sees the in-out with the 2 lanes, but there are ownership rights and a residential on one side and the church on the other side. So it all plays together. Timing plays, whether it be City of Livonia, City of Westland, or County of Wayne, plays a big part, and if they, what kind of involvement they're going to have. And it's always not because of drainage. It's not easy, nor is it always the best thing with regard to environment to pave everything that you see. It just makes the water move faster and becomes more problematic on the back end of it. But all that can get worked out with enough time, or potentially can get worked out if you get approvals again from whether it be City of Livonia, City of Westland, or County of Wayne.
Any other?
No, I'm good,
No.
thanks.
My
Mrs.
question
Bradshaw.
was more along, or comment was more along the lines of Tammy's at Stevenson specifically. I get asked quite a few times, why can't we just pave that back road and add some more access into the parking lot? Or is there any way, at Stevenson, we're doing a 1-to-1 exchange, I'm assuming, right? We're not adding any area space for additional parking. I get that question a lot because the church next door, unfortunately, is not allowing parking this year, which is unfortunate because there's many students that have a difficult time getting to school because there's not enough parking for students there. So I guess the question, I get questioned a lot about why aren't we doing anything off the back, or why can't we just pave a little more area? And I guess you answered that, so. But for all those people that are listening tonight, the millions out there for Stevenson, we just can't do that, unfortunately, so.
Again, it's not that you can, it just takes a more thorough and timely process to go about trying to achieve that. I wouldn't say anything's impossible, but there's more to it.
Right,
And
there's
need
more.
approvals.
Right, especially in that back, because
I
the
don't
back
know
area is
if anybody
just,
would let us start.
right, tearing that up back there.
Going back there.
I know, I get it. I get it. Thanks.
Mrs. Frank, you have a question?
I just had a question about the buildings that we're redoing, like resurfacing Roosevelt and some of the ones that we're going to do in Phase 2. Whenever we're restriping and doing different bus loops and that sort of thing, I'm just wondering if we have great communication with the buildings, the principal, some of the staff there, because I think one of the things, I was just at one of Novi's schools, and they had amazing signage. I mean, their signage all along said, drop kids off here, don't drop kids off, bus lane only. I mean, it was just, every step you went, it said what it was for, and I even got what they were going to do. And it was just great, because I think sometimes parents just don't know, or grandparents come, and this is the way that it is, but if a grandparent comes one day in the middle of the year, they can stop up the whole line, and we can spend millions of dollars making it great. But if we're not communicating that to the parents, communicating it to the staff, they don't know what we're doing, what our end goal is. And so Laura Boca did a fantastic job at the beginning of the year. She had almost 4 people out there outside just telling people where to go and how to go and how to, they reconfigured their drop-off as much as they could just with them. But it was really great to have people outside telling people where to go, to retrain parents, retrain people. So I guess that's my question, is in this funding, is there any signage? Is there anything that helps people know that we're restructuring this, we want you to go here instead of here?
There's first of all, there's communication with the buildings. We sit with them, especially the Roosevelt one, because it was such a drastic change, whereas we're just paving the Franklin bus loop. But even with that, I know that Mr. Willenberg was contacted with regard to the canopy. Is it used? Do you want it peeled back? Those types of conversations. Will be continued conversation with the buildings. And you're right, it is the people more than a sign. I think it's people more than a sign. Now, signs need to be there, and there's paint, the signage with whether it be arrows or actually things like, no parking or buses only or whatever potentially that could be. There's signage that gets put up with a traditional post and metal sign, etc. All that occurs, but nothing beats having the staff, and if you show up at any of those buildings, you see them out there in those mornings and those afternoons, trying to direct traffic, helping parents, helping students, get out of the cars at our younger elementary grades, etc. That's the key, and they do a phenomenal job. We can get signs up, and in fact, just to throw it out there, if you haven't noticed, Stevenson High School, it was suggested to have a right turn green arrow for the westbound 6 Mile folks, because they were sitting in the parking lot itself was doing just fine with pickup and drop off. I should call it drop off because it was the mornings. And the suggestion was a green arrow, so as instead of sitting facing westbound at a red, to be able to turn in and get off of 6 Mile. Wayne County was tremendous. They were quick to respond. The arrow was put out there, I think the week of Thanksgiving or the week before Thanksgiving, and immediately that first morning, it got folks off of 6 Mile, and that wasn't, that you didn't need a sign, you didn't tell them. As soon as they saw that arrow go up,
they were happy.
It cleared up 6 Mile. So, I mean, we're willing to go back and say, what do we need? If we missed a sign, can we put one? If we need to restripe something, can we do that? Things like that are easier to do. Paint and signs are relatively cheap when it comes to putting those up. So we're always willing to work with the staff and hear sort of how it went after a little bit and see if we can make those kinds of tweaks. But it's a great point, and nothing beats the staff helping out, but then also letting us know, we think it'd be great if you painted this area or drew that line to show that the buses are here, and we could always go back and do those things if we missed it the first time.
So yes, the funds can be used for that. In fact, we did. At Stevenson, I think there was a huge shift. Before we were able to get the paint signage and the actual signage, it was a bit confusing to determine how that new flow was going to go. That helped considerably to have things go a little bit more smoothly.
Okay. So but our flow study, what's it called?
Traffic study.
Traffic study. They don't recommend signs here. That's not part of this. That's going to be, we see what we need at the end afterwards. They don't tell us, you know what?
That's part of it.
It is part of the design.
They're looking at how the traffic's coming in, how the traffic's going out, et cetera, but they're also looking at timings and their timing, acceptable timings, and we've talked about this before when we talked about Stevenson. Their timing acceptabilities at high points, at peak points, is far different than yours, mine, and parents and students who are driving through. They understand that when you have a glut of cars in a 15-minute time period, that it's going to be slow. Right. So they'll say, this is exactly how it's supposed to work, whereas we go, no, I'm late. It's got to go faster than this.
Right, I think safety is the biggest thing.
That's what they do.
Not time, but just safety. The cars are not cutting in and out all over. And then,
and that's human. That's the human factor.
Right.
And that's some of the stuff we did at Rosedale was to get rid of a cone, which you could potentially decide, I'm going to just drive over the cone, and we're going to have curbs and things like that. So we want to make it a much more structured, solid structure for safety purposes, for flow purposes, and that gives, as Mr. Smith said, that walkway area as well.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Centers?
So, just thinking about Grant for a minute, there's a large field to the west, and I don't know if it's, west of the parking lot, I don't know if it's designed to be a water retention area, but I think when we do get a lot of precipitation, that area does tend to flood and get really, really damp. Is that something that we're okay with, the building's okay with, or is that something that would be addressed?
To the west of the building on our.
Yeah, so if you come
is
out
it
the
our
front of the
property or is it
building, you're
park
looking
property?
I don't think we use that for the playground area
Yeah.
or anything, so I don't know that that would be something that would be on our,
It's kind of the area inside the trail,
Immediate
if you
list.
will, yeah.
yeah.
The only reason I ask is because one time, I was there last year for an event or something, I saw a kindergartner go about thigh deep into the water, and I was like, wow, that's really deep.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something they've talked to you about or not.
No, and if I'm
Okay.
thinking of where your description is, I don't think that's used, but I think that's part of the park, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the
I
park.
believe that's the part that was deeded over, but we could take a look at that.
Okay.
If I'm
So
If
the
I'm
north,
thinking of west
the
correctly,
north
which
side
I
and the
believe it towards-
northwest, but
yeah.
then right over the parking lot, there's a field with just path around it, and that area gets
It's
really
to the left.
moist.
As
But
you
I
go
don't know
to
if
the
that's,
left, you're talking
that's
about.
us or not, yeah.
Yeah, that's the park.
That's part of the
We're
park. too,
very,
okay.
very much where our parking lot ends, not much
Oh.
further over is the
Yeah,
end of
right.
Grant.
So
Yeah.
that's the cities, okay. All right, good enough.
That's it, Mr. Stein?
To say that,
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. I think it's worth mentioning to our community that many of our schools, particularly our elementary schools, were designed when we had a lot more walkers. They were not designed for the traffic load that we have for parking or for dropping off kids and stuff. So while we do traffic studies and we can reconfigure some parking lots and things, we're still very dependent on the patience and the cooperation of the parents as they drop off to follow the rules and to keep our children's safety paramount. If we can have the best design in the world, but if we don't have the cooperation of parents dropping off and picking up children, then that jeopardizes the safety of our kids. We're doing the best we can in a situation that was not designed for this kind of load, but we ask them to meet us halfway and remember it's about keeping our kids safe.
Good point.
are there questions on Franklin, Roosevelt, and Stevenson, the projects that we're going to ask you to vote on next week?
No.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is going to be regular agenda,
Please.
right?
May I have a point of indulgence? I'd like to ask Mr. Archibald to just come up very briefly for just a moment, because I know we had talked earlier in the year, and Mrs. Bradford brought up this evening the concerns about parking availability at Stevenson. I know that school has done quite a bit of work on trying to meet those requests and have made success in a lot of areas. And so I just wanted to ask him if he would come up and just give you a brief update.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
We'll
Good e-
charge this against
good
Mr.
evening.
Francis's time.
Yes, as always.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me get the clock out.
So, certainly, you know, what Stevenson came back to this fall, following the construction and the change with regard to the use of the church, created a little bit of a bottleneck with regard to parking that they hadn't experienced maybe in the last few years. And Mr. Lewis and Mr. Harper and several others, myself, had been looking at their procedures and policies. The intent is always to get as many students a permit as possible. That's certainly more convenient for the students and for their parents, and brings any problems that might unfold into the community, because students are parking out of the community, out of the community. So it works out well for everyone. With respect to the church, I didn't want to throw them under the bus, no pun intended. They've been a very good neighbor, are available to us for events. Just weren't able to accommodate us this year because of the increased activities going on at the church, and so they could not make that commitment on a regular daily basis. So it wasn't just that they decided now that they weren't going to be helpful, so I want to make sure that we at least state publicly that they have been and continue to be good neighbors. In the fall, I think Stevenson had about 505 student requests for parking permits. By the time it was all said and done into October, I think they had all but about 50 of those accommodated, which obviously is, you know, in the 90% plus range. So, they were working to, and I've been around school parking lots for 25 years, and the only policy that everybody likes is when they all get a permit. And as soon as you have to deny someone, your policy is unfair.
Yes, I
And,
understand.
And again, our goal is always to be accommodating, but the school spent a lot of time this fall evaluating their process and their procedures. The purpose behind Parking for School is really to reinforce or to support students involved in school activities. The one criteria that holds true and few people seem to argue with is senior privilege. And then beyond that, they really do try to focus on student need and those activities. Stevenson has gone to rotating many of their parking permits used for athletics on a seasonal basis, as opposed to assigning those for a semester or for the year, again, to try and be more accommodating to folks. So they're trying. I will hope hopefully some of the feedback you've received that's less favorable had to do more with the beginning of the year where it was a rougher start.
Yeah.
But any other questions or?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you for addressing that, because I think that helps the community to know what's going on. Okay.
Are we still utilizing the back exit for Stevenson at the end of the school day through basically coming out to Curtis by the Marshall parking lot?
Unless it's changed, I believe they come in that way, but because there are little ones in that area at the end of the day, we do not allow them to exit that way.
Okay.
So they still exit on the 6 mile.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Archibald.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Francis.
Thank you.
All right, so this item will go on regular agenda.
What's that? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr.
allowing
Smith.
us to share.
Appreciate it. All right, then we'll go to wireless routers.
Yes, I'd like to call up some of my friends.
Ooh.
Bring your own chair.
Is there anybody here?
Yes, thank you. I got that one. We're presenting to you the wireless access point, the purchase. As I mentioned to you, started to use snack food to explain this at one point in my life and decided I should bring some friends in to explain it better to the board and to the community of the purpose we're going to have. So, Mr. Clan Mr. Tim Clan is seated to my right. He is, of course, the Administrator of Information Technology in the district. I'll let him introduce the others that are joining him, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Do you want the packet on or
No, I'm good. So tonight we have from Barton Mallow, we have Rob Grieger and Paul Twig. I think Paul's going to do his best here to explain things without using cookies or snack foods.
Small words, too. You need to use.
So I'll go ahead and let Paul get started.
Okay. Does everybody have a copy of the letter?
Yes.
So 4 years ago, right after the bond passed, the wireless infrastructure was one of the first projects. It was, when it was bid out, we were just on the cusp between wireless standards. You were actually the first district in the state to implement a large-scale wireless network using the current standards that are on right now. That standard was ratified in a way that it was going to come out in what they called 2 waves, so wave 1, wave 2, and the manufacturer that was chosen for the access points, like the one right above our head, Cisco, they planned on coming out with an access point that was wave 1, and they would later come out with a module that would slide into it and make it wave 2. To try to make a long story short, they never ended up manufacturing that module, so they couldn't fulfill their contractual obligation. We've been talking for them for a while about how to handle this, and they came back with a pretty good proposal. But as we looked at it, there were some different reasons to bid it out. As you can see, the base bid pricing came back at a little bit over $1 million, but the amount that the people of Livonia would end up having to pay is substantially less than that for 3 reasons. One, Cisco offered a very good trade-in credit to buy back those access points that didn't have the expandability, so there was about a $220,000 savings from that. The second is the contractor who was going to be doing the install of the initial contract, there's some pieces of their contract that they can't fulfill. So there was about $100,000 of money that would be coming back from their contract. And the third is from the timing of this, there's a federal program through the Universal Service Fund called E-Rate. When you look on your phone bill, everybody pays a couple dollars toward this E-Rate program. And right now, the focus of that is to put in wireless networks. The district would end up getting about half of the eligible money back, and with the solution that we're recommending now, it would probably be about $400,000 back. It's not a guarantee at this point, but I don't know of a district in the past couple of years that have been focusing on using it to focus on wireless that haven't gotten their money. And in another year, they're going to be changing that program, and it might shift from wireless to something else. So if we were to wait a year or two and replace your wireless then, you might not have that opportunity. So that all comes to where the snack food would be. And
I sounded just like that when I was explaining it. I know what the difference was.
So it means in essence that about $1 million project ends up costing, net somewhere in that $375,000 range. So it's a very good opportunity. And one last thing to point out, that the initial plan was only to upgrade the access points at the secondary buildings. This upgrades all of the buildings so that there will be a new, 6-year warranty, new 6-year, installation on products throughout the district that, we think is going to be covering you for the foreseeable future.
And this is out of 2013 bond, and there is funding in the tech portion of that, and this was always planned to go from wave 1 to wave 2.
Questions? Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. True, could you indicate whether or not we would be impacted at all on the E-rate reimbursement, because we already have wireless installed and we're doing a upgrade of so to speak? Would that at all impact our ability to obtain that reimbursement?
I don't believe so, because most districts that get wireless are doing some kind of an upgrade as a part of their wireless project. It might be from an older version of wireless than what you're doing, but no, the bid met all of the eligibility requirements. We spoke with your E-rate consultant, and she didn't seem to think that there was going to be any issues. So all indications are we should be receiving this money. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Senish.
By upgrading, what kind of improvements will we see? Speed, reliability? I mean, what coverage?
The main difference between Wave 1 and Wave 2 is when devices come in that can support it, it does a better job of supporting lots of people in a small space, and that's what schools have, are lots of devices in a small space.
Great. Other questions? I'm looking at the bids.
Mm-hmm.
So the bidder is Presidio?
Yes. The recommended bidder is Presidio.
Are they the ones who, well, our original agreement way back was with Cisco, or was it Cisco equipment?
With a company called NetTech, who was purchased a few years ago by Presidio. So this is the same company that is doing your wireless now, which is part of the reason why there's some of the, or their bid could include some additional savings compared to some of the others, because they don't have to survey all the buildings twice. They've already done that. They already have that information. They already know all of your configurations, so that they have some efficiencies that helps make them a lower bidder.
And what they're using is Cisco equipment?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other equipment out there that would be better than Cisco?
It's a little bit of a Coke and Pepsi question. Some of it might be on preference, but Cisco is, tier 1. They're, one of the major network and wireless companies that are out there, and your department, Tim's department, already has strong familiarity with the management tools, how to live in a Cisco network. Your phone system is also Cisco. So while they're not the only manufacturer, and the bids were not written so that only Cisco people could respond, you already are a Cisco shop, so it does make it a little bit easier to maintain that.
Okay. So from your standpoint, Tim, this is, you go along with this recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. As Paul was saying, we have Cisco access points currently. We have Cisco switches, which are the switches that for all the wired and wireless connections, are handling all the traffic in the district. Our phone system now and phones are all Cisco. Our security camera system is all Cisco. So there's definitely some efficiencies to be gained by having all the equipment the same as far as from a management perspective. And I think, from my history with it, there's not much else out there that really compares equally to what Cisco has to offer from a product and a support standpoint.
From our conversation, it was Cisco who originally promised the add-on to the Wave 1 to make it a Wave 2. That's why we're getting the discount on what Cisco's taking back units and getting us the next generation unit, hence getting the rebate, or not the rebate, but rather the
trade-in credit.
Trade-in credit. Thank you for the items that we currently have.
Okay.
So it's all sort of tied together with that piece too.
And I can't speak to the initial bid for the wireless firsthand because I wasn't intimately involved with it. But each case where you have a Cisco product did go through a competitive bid process, and each time Cisco was a little better.
Good point.
All right. Mrs. Bradford?
I have a question. On the contract, it's for $879,000 roughly. Do we bid out for that, and is that what we have to approve, and then we get the E-rate back?
Right.
That's
And how soon would we know? Because I'm assuming we don't know if we're getting the E-rate, but we thought we are. How will we know that? So if we could potentially be paying the $879 or less those other deductions, except for that E-rate, how soon would we know that?
Correct. The E-rate piece we won't know about for another year. So districts that were going through this process a year ago started to find out in the spring throughout the summer. So you're right, there is a possibility that you might not get that E-rate reimbursement, but it's a...
We think we will. So,
yes, it's very unlikely.
You bring up actually a good point, because even in my, looking at Barton Mallow's letter and my memo, we both use 879, 399, and 21 and that's what I would have put into the cap sheet. But as we discussed it, Tim and I will look into the idea of if the 109,901 for the trade-in is an automatic, then is Presidio okay with, and I think that's just, we can contact them tomorrow and say, I'd like to have it written then with the 879, 399 minus the 1099. We're somewhere around, the 770.
And then if we get the E-rate back.
I mean, they're saying we're getting the trade-in. I'm just trying to figure out what I want
that
to put in the cap sheet so that you can bid on that recommendation. So if Presidio says, no, that number is solid and that's automatic, then I think we can have them do it from there.
And whether or not that would affect the E-rate amount.
It does not impact the E-rate amount, because
Okay.
it's not for the new equipment. It's the credit for the old equipment that wasn't being purchased. And I believe that the board would be approving the 879, but when we send them that contract to sign for the 879, what goes hand in hand with that is a deduct change order for the 109, so they would
back that off.
Yes,
Right,
so
from
you
the
would
start.
be executing those both at the same time.
Can we confirm
But
that
not
tomorrow?
the E-rate, we would be waiting on the E-rate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the 109,901 is in addition to the 220,000?
So think of it, the 220,000 might be the trading credit for taking those back. The 109 is what we're deducting from their contract from not buying those modules.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Burton?
When that cap sheet is written, can it be spelled out that it is, we're making this agreement under the assumption that these other two pieces, the 109 and the 220?
Well, let me
Just so
ask
that we have it in writing?
Let me ask you this, because what you're voting on is the amount that we can spend on it, and we're talking about it being less. So what, just for the sake of argument, what if we get nothing back and it was $880,000? Would you be authorizing that anyway to go into the next wave 2, because it does service more people in small places? Is it important? I think that's a question, because if we're saying, what are we willing to do? If we don't get the E-rate back, then it's not like we can do take-back Cs. So we almost have to at least say,
We're going for it.
Yeah, we're going for it. That's where I'm thinking, because whatever you're voting on, I'm kind of asking the question, would it be the amount that we're doing? And that's why I want to confirm with Presidio, if it is going to be a guaranteed one-time last.
We have that in an email.
Okay, but then can we have
Right.
them vote on that amount? Because that's how much they're authorizing for us to pay, because we're having that.
Right, I understand that the 400 can't be part of that, because
Right.
that's really out of our control right now. But for the parts that are within our control and within our agreement already, can that be before the board at the vote?
It would seem to me that with the cap sheet, when you put it in, it's an up to amount that we would be authorizing.
Because we've done that with other things where you say you're going to, but it came in less, so.
Mrs. O'Quist?
So what I'm going to suggest is that we not have you answer hypotheticals. Why don't you let us check tomorrow?
Okay.
And we will get you a final answer before we ask you to vote on this. So we'll get that information. We'll send you out an email prior to the update letting you know, even if we have to authorize the $879, that we do have an agreement for the $109,000 credit. So we would let's spell out for you clearly what you're authorizing, what the guaranteed credit will be, and then for your information, what we anticipate with regard to the E-rate, and you understanding that that's pending approval by a
Sure.
different entity. So what we would be asking you to approve, the credit we have been guaranteed in writing, and we will confirm that, and then that is what we would spell out the total amount that you're authorizing in the cap sheet, and you will have the backup information. Well, we can include that in the rationale, probably not in the motion, but in the rationale in the cap sheet with regard to the give back of the 109. But let us confirm that for you. We'll send that out to you prior. You can let me know if that's acceptable. If it is, then Mr. Francis can prepare the cap sheet with that information and the rationale. Does that sound okay?
Yep.
So basically, the E-rate, we have to say, we agree to that amount, even if we're going to vote on that. We could not maybe get that E-rate, but we have to all agree when we vote on it that would be a bonus if we got the E-rate.
Yes, it's not unlike when we talked about, for instance, the literacy coaches, or sometimes we talk about literacy materials, and we let you know that we're going to go for a grant.
Okay.
But that the grant may not be approved for another 3 to 4 months. So you're determining, yes, we do want to purchase this service.
Okay.
We will approve it if we get the grant.
Great.
Then that,
If we,
that
that's a bonus.
augments our
Okay.
funding. So that would be similar to the E-rate. But we will get you an answer on the other
Okay.
portion prior to that.
Can I get a clarification on the E-rate? I want to make sure that I'm understanding the contingency. Is it we might get it or we might not get it, or that we might get it and we don't know the amount? Do you understand? I mean, is it one or the other, we're going to get it or we're not going to get it?
Oh, up to. So the E-rate is it
50%.
all or nothing, or could they say, we'll
Right.
you can get 70% of what you asked for back?
No, it's not necessarily all or nothing.
Okay.
Okay,
It's what they approve, is what you're saying.
okay, got it. Mrs. Benefit?
So what does it look like if we said, no, we didn't want to go with this upgrade? So right now, we've got wireless, it's, working relatively well, I guess. You mentioned it extends our warranty. If we purchase this, there's an extended warranty, it replaces everything. What would that look like, and how would that impact our district if we said, no, we're going to wait until, I don't know, whenever, to replace them, or no, we don't need to replace them because they're functional? What does it look like if we don't replace them?
Me or you?
Go ahead, you can start, I'll chime in.
Okay. You have a very good wireless network now. So it's not as if, it would be no worse off than you are now from a speed and performance standpoint. As you get more devices, as you get newer devices that can take advantage of the newer speeds, it would end up being your bottleneck, but there's many places that would consider a network that, like the one that you have, to be fantastic, which it is. After the warranty expires next summer, then you have to start paying the maintenance and the ongoing costs out of your general fund.
Okay.
So,
So
you know, that is an expense that you would start
These
to
are only good, or only warranted until next summer.
through, let's see, 18. I believe.
Yeah, through the summer, through 18.
Okay,
So
so that was a.
So after that, you're gonna start to, you know,
Okay.
pay additional.
Okay.
The other point is the controllers that you have for the access points now are approaching their end of life as far as a support standpoint and a selling standpoint. This would give you new controllers for these access points that would, again, allow you expandability in the future, which you don't have as much of with the current controllers.
Okay.
And would be, again, warranted out for the 5 years.
So there are probably, I don't know if technically, but kind of, there are some cost savings involved with doing this with an additional 6 years or 5 minus 1. So an additional 5 years of repairs and maintenance we're not going to have to pay for. We're not going to have the replacement costs for some of the other equipment.
Correct.
And so this is actually, even though there's a cost involved, it's going to mitigate some other costs that we're going to incur if we don't do that.
Right, because we would incur the costs eventually as we're going down the road, and we may not have
Good,
E-rate as an
right.
option at that point,
Okay.
so.
And you wouldn't get the trading credit at that point either.
Right.
Right,
Okay,
so, yeah.
excellent. Thank you very much.
Mr. Centers?
Just kind of reflecting on just in the last few years, how many devices we've added and how mobile our students have become. I imagine in a few years, the capacity will, number of people using it will continue to increase dramatically. The number of devices will probably increase dramatically. So given the opportunity, I think we'll probably really appreciate that extra capacity, I would imagine.
Yeah, and one of the questions that we discussed and looked at when we were trying to size the controller that goes along with it is a limit of 20,000, which we started to question, is that going to be big enough? It's big enough right now to handle 20,000 devices at one time, but do we need to look at what is this going to look like 2, 3, 4 years down the road when we have even more devices and more students are connected? And so it gave us the opportunity to step it up to the next level a little bit to make sure we can grow into it as we move forward. Because like we said, this is good for the next 6 years till summer of 2024, I think it would be. And does give us some greater capacity as well with the number of devices.
If we didn't have wireless in this district right now, would we be getting this system or something different?
We'd be getting
this system for sure.
And when we talk about the number of devices, you're right that the number of Chromebooks and kids and teachers walking in with phones, but there's also the devices that you might not think about. A few years from now, when you replace the clock system, you might buy, wireless clocks that go and that utilize it, and those are all devices too.
Yes.
Okay.
Wireless devices, all the,
Apple Watch,
people come to school with their watch, their phone, a laptop,
yeah.
there's 3 devices for one person right there. The clock systems, there's also even some of our, other systems in the district have that, and again, even the new televisions coming in have wireless, the Apple TVs, the, Android devices, we just set up some clever touch displays today at LCTC, and those connect to the wireless as well, so there's a lot of district devices and student and staff devices that are coming in and will continue to grow as we get further into this.
Hence the 20,000, even though we don't have 20,000 students, put one in each hand of theirs, which is probably what's occurring.
Well, we appreciate you looking down the road and
Yes.
making sure that we're covered as we grow, so. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, then this will go on regular as well.
We'll clarify the cap sheet.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to item C. Playground equipment purchase 2013
I have
bond.
handouts.
Oh,
All
pretty
right.
handouts.
This is exciting. Is this the real one? The actual color?
This is the real
The
thing.
actual.
This is the real
Glasses.
thing?
So, just
Oh, wow.
do not do not, first of all, students, do not move ahead, stick with the teacher.
I was already going to turn the page.
Stay on page one over there.
All right.
Okay. The colors are not, they're only happen to be examples from from the website, okay? What I wanted to do with this packet was to explain not just the equipment, but the overall idea that the committee came up with of minimums for the elementary schools, what would be at a given playground, and that would be in sum. Not what are you necessarily getting at every single building, but what will that building end up with? What will the children at that building have with regard to the playground? So that's the overall premise. I tried to put some notes into this packet for you, and there's pictures, but again, colors are going to be chosen. There's a subcommittee from the playground committee that is currently working to make color selection with regard to having a scheme and then giving the buildings several schemes to choose from versus the potential of difficult, chaotic, hitting a wall of here's every piece, because you have to, there's the plastic, the composite, the metal, there's different palettes for every piece, and you're supposed to, depending on the piece, there's multiple items that you choose, et cetera, et cetera. So our subcommittee tried to create, okay, here are like 3 different potential palettes. One's a little brighter, one's a little more muted, one's in the schools will be able to then choose, hey, for our big structure, we'll take that palette. We're working with trying to get some renderings in. I've already gotten a few in. They've already critiqued our choices from the company. The rep has said, you really would like to have some contrast between this and this. You might think about lightening the color. So we're going to get that narrowed down and then get the color choices for our structures out to buildings. They'll get them back, and we'll be able to put the order together if the board decides to vote for this and move forward. But that said, and let's put that aside for a moment, I'd like to take you and the folks who are watching through the ideas that we'll have at the elementary buildings. So starting with the top here, each school will have a walking path or track. It may not be an exact oval. What you have is a satellite shot from Google of Cooper. Cooper is sort of the inspiration for this. They have that track in the back of compacted gravel that they really enjoy. And speaking to the principals, they're excited because we have some run clubs at the elementaries and just in general, a place to maybe walk, burn off energy. I know at Cooper that they've had students who are maybe not having a good moment or a good day and are agitated or aggravated, where I know the principal has walked around the track with just speaking to the student, burning off that energy. I mean, this isn't just a piece of playground equipment, it's part of the property. But they may look different and will look different at every building. Some buildings actually have some current asphalt path that we could connect into with it. We've spoken and been out to the buildings, Mr. Lau, Mr. Roberts, et cetera, talking to the principals and PE teachers, parts of their staff, saying, how would you want this to look, wrap it around somehow, the equipment. So it's just going to look different in every building, but there'll be some type of path. So that's the first section. It's something that we want to have at each building. Okay. Next, all elementary schools will have a minimum of 24 swings. That means they put 2 swings in a bay. In the bays, you have the arches and in between, so they put two swings in a bay. What you're looking at is a picture of the style that we are requesting. Okay, it's got the arched bays. It goes a little bit better with the new structures that have more of the looping and arching posts in them. So regardless of what the color is going to end up being, you can see what it would look like. We say at least 24 because we do have, I can think of one building that already has 26 excellent swings. So, they're not going to get new swings because they already have swings. And some schools have 0 swings, so they'll get all 12 bays. So each school will have K-6, a minimum of 24 swings. Do you have a question on that? Do you have a question on that? Who has a question on that? Okay.
I wanted to mention that the requirements for swings and swing design has changed. So where you may be used to seeing 4 swings in a bay or more, where they were a little closer together, where you only had to have certain ground cover in the front and in the back, now there has to be a larger swing zone area, both forward and backward, so that the fall zone area, and there also has to be more room in between each of those swinging and cannot have more than 2 per what's referred to as a bay. So you, as you look at that, you may be thinking, that will take up, considerable amount of property and land, as well as the height differential. And so all of these meet the current specifications. So while some of our swings were grandfathered in, some did need to be removed because they no longer met the requirements. And so these meet all of the new requirements for swings.
Even the connectors are different now than they used to be years ago, where you could fling it all the way around the top part. Let's face it, that's part of the fun.
And they were super high. Remember how high you could just swing? Okay.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Okay.
Okay. 24 swings, like Webster that has 300 kids, as opposed to a Riley who has 700 kids, 600. 24, or it's based on student count?
Well, actually, we wanted the minimum.
Just as an example.
We wanted the team, which was made up of administrators, teachers, et cetera, landed on 24 as being a good number, and then there was discussion of do we scale back the minimum, and then at this point,
24.
Most of our schools have some fairly even numbers now at the K-4 level. Yes, we have a couple of schools that have fewer children. Frankly, it was just simpler to say 24 and move along. If there were wild swings and there, we had multiple levels, I think we would have gotten more into the idea of, okay, well, some schools only have 200 kids, some schools have 350, some schools have 550. Then we may have, but originally we thought about that, and then when we really looked at the overall numbers, we said, it's probably just easier to maintain a number. And then, if a school has more than that, like Riley does have more than 24 already, so they'll just keep them. It's not like we're going to go in and say, well, you have 26, we're going to remove 2. So if you have it, then and it's viable, it stays.
And with we had a couple of upper elementary folks, and they were able to weigh in.
Oh, yeah.
Because we did talk about that a little bit, and what do they use more, and so they were able to give us feedback. We had a couple of our physical education teachers, a couple of folks who work noon duty, as well as some of the administrators, and so they were also able to determine the high-used items and where we may want to grow some of that capacity and where what we have now seems sufficient. So that was great feedback on the team.
And to that point, and it sort of jumped, because I was going to discuss it during the larger play structures, but the upper elementaries have said our students play more even off of equipment. They were less concerned with equipment. They're talking about tracks will be used. They like to play soccer. As you know, we made a purchase and got a lot of playground balls, soccer balls, footballs, et cetera, into the schools. The 5-6 folks are saying our kids do more of that. They're concerned about equipment, don't get me wrong. But and then the K4s said ours tend to stay with more of equipment, and some do wander off and play games, but that starts to become much more prevalent as they get older. So there's far less of that, because we had a Johnson and a Riley person, both in complete agreement with how that age student plays.
And we did differentiate when we bought the playground the loose playground equipment.
We get them more, yes, we get them more.
Actually based on size. So for that, we did differentiate based on size.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. Doesn't the upper L system, like Riley, have staggered recesses anyway? So you don't have all 700 kids out there at the same time?
Yes.
So shouldn't be an issue.
No, from all accounts, and I don't want to, the people on the committee are anonymous. They just like to do good works and not have people know who they are. But there were certainly a lot of folks in there who are K-6 people. Special education was also considered, and we had one of the coordinators in there, and there was a lot of discussion similar, saying how is it used, how many go out at one time, what do the children enjoy, And we got a little taste of it as well with the equipment that the board had purchased this fall that was put in, seeing some of the individual events that the children like at the elementary. So it's actually been it's been very fun, actually. It's difficult, and I understand a lot of the parents are concerned, and there's community members that are concerned that we're missing some items, but it's been a great group of people to work with, and it's incredible how much they cared and gave and wanted to find. Yeah, we were driving to all different public parks at our own time, and people would say, there's a place by me I'm going to go check out over the weekend, and we went to Beverly Park with the city and just checked out things to see what's out there. It was really a great group, and I appreciate them 1,000-fold. So, let me get back into this. So that was swings. How did I not know this was gonna?
Could barely be on the page.
Yeah. No, that's great. Next, I want to talk about the large multi-event play structures. What we did as a committee was go through many of them and narrow down. Instead of saying, here's the whole catalog, have at it building, we wanted to narrow it down and give them a selection. Interestingly enough, even what we narrowed, they ended up selecting and leaving one off. Like, no building selected one of the items, which was just, I thought, interesting. And they gravitated really to this first one that you're looking at was by far the most popular. But we ended up with 3 different structures that buildings had chosen to order for themselves. So what we're looking at, first of all, before you look at the Prairie Meadows or any of the others, is K4 buildings. And when I say K4, I'm going to include Niji Aero and I'm going to include Webster in that count, are going to have 2 large multi-event play structures on their playground. Now, that doesn't mean they're getting 2 new ones. We have structures that are viable, have life in them. The ones that are going to remain, and many of them will remain at the playgrounds, at the schools, we're going to go in, take note of them, and say, okay, there may be one of the chains that might be broken, or a piece here that needs replacing, etc. We are going to go in and do a kind of a update, rehab, maintenance on all of the ones that are going to remain. The structure of them, the footings are good, the posts are good. They're not that old, or they have life in them. I mean, even the vendors came by and looked and said, this thing is in great shape, type of thing. So we'll say, okay, what would it take to bring a crew in and do what they need to do, because you need to be a professional installer of playground equipment to fix them and repair them. We'll do that, so anything that stays will be maintained, inspected. They've all been inspected, but we'll just say, okay, if this happens to be missing one of its posts, we'll put a little thing in. So that would be one, and so buildings K4 will have 2 large structures. Generally speaking, the buildings choose to break those up in a lower and upper grade range. So oftentimes a K2 structure and a 3-4 structure. Now, having said that, all of these structures are rated ages 5 to 12. There's not a real difference, except if you look at it with your eye and say, that's got maybe a taller climbing area, or there's more items that they might swing from one to the other. So that might be my 3-4s versus I like this one over here to be for my K2s. And some of our playgrounds have 2 distinct areas, and one they label their K2, one they label their 3-4, etc. So however the building would like that to play out, we've actually worked with them and asked, you have 2 structures now, one we're going to remove. Tell us who is on that one. If we're going to remove that now, which structure do you want to replace? So is this currently your K2 or is this currently your 3-4s? All of them are rated for these ages, but what would you like to replace that? So we've worked in that manner to say, replace age level for age level at the K4. At the 5-6, 1 large play structure will be at a building. Again, going back to the conversation of the upper elementary representatives who said, our children, while they do enjoy playing on the structures, are moving more at that age to playing on, other items, playing with each other, games, soccer, different, foursquare, etc. They're moving into some of their own self-selected games on the fields. So they'll have 1 large structure. Now, what you have in front of you is one of the more popular items called the Prairie Meadow. Again, color not what necessarily is going to be chosen, because buildings will have some choices on that. But you can see multiple events. There's climbing events, there's slides, there's bridges, there are multiple events on here, and it's actually a pretty large. Yeah, it's spread, because when you look to the right there, that little climbing wall with the other items is almost its own item off to the side, and there's some stepping stools that you get out to it that the kids can kind of hop from one to the other. So it's a pretty broad, and I'm not surprised that it's popular, because it has many events, and it looks like it's a pretty fun one. So if you flip over the page, it's another picture just from a different angle, and then you can see the overhead and all of the what they call events. So every time there's something that a child can do, even if it's just walking across the bridge or playing with the little steering wheel, each of them are an event.
Wow. Are there any parts of this that are wheelchair friendly?
So some of the discussion was about ADA and what we could do for our students with disabilities. So the lower platforms students can get on, some of our individual events as well, that's going to be chosen, that you'll see in a little bit, are ADA appropriate. So obviously, depending on the disability, the climbing pieces, et cetera, are not, but the low-lying items, they state as being ADA compliant with regard to being able to sit or lie on those lower platforms. And I'll point out something that we do have that is ADA compliant in an individual event that is being used at Webster. And in fact, they put it into the playground area for the students with the disabilities, and they really enjoy it. So I'll point that out when we get there.
And you also offered some modified swings
Yeah,
that are
well,
appropriate as well, some cradle swings.
That is an option for, that's going to be something that's going to be at Jackson, or they did ask for some cradle swings.
Excellent.
Okay, so if you flip over, then another item that was selected by a few buildings was the waterfall slides.
Oh, wow.
This is a rendering. They didn't have an actual snapshot on their website that I pulled from. They had the colored rendering. So you can see, again, many events, climbing walls, slides, different types of slides, many climbing areas. Frankly, the way what we learned going through is the way of playground equipment is climbing. It seems that climbing is one of the very popular and great for the motor skills and balance and dexterity and everything else. So there's the third choice is the triple slides ship. I think you know where the name comes from once you see it.
Oh, boy.
This one looks like it's got sails on top, and it definitely has a hull of a ship in the front. Again, another one that a couple buildings chose. It has the triple slide. You see that part of it. It's got the whole motif. It's got a little climbing wall area, ladders, bridges, hanging bars, etc. And a telescope at one point. It took us a while to find the telescope, but there's a little spot. This little dot behind the middle slide you can see is the telescope. I don't know if it's an actual working telescope or not. We'll find out.
You know what was sweet
No, it's
is,
a play one, I
as we visited some schools just for other, whether it was for walkthroughs or for other reasons, in some cases there were, there were voting slides, and so there may be tally marks that students were making with regard to which they preferred. So there was an opportunity for folks there to weigh in, so whether that might have been some staff or students or parents, but it was sweet to see some of the feedback from the students as they looked at the different events, and we're able to give their feedback on what they liked.
Yeah. So it ended up being 3 that between all the buildings that they were interested in, and I don't know if they spoke to each other or if just great minds think alike, but it seemed like
From about 7 or 8, right?
yeah, we had, I think, about 5 originally, and there's only 3 that were actually chosen. So, which is great. I mean, that's obviously there's something that drew the buildings to these few. So that's really great. So like I said, we'll have large play, multi-event play structures, 2 at the K4s, 1 at the 5-6s, and that simply means that they will have that many viable at their building. Doesn't mean everybody's getting 2 new ones at the K4. That certainly isn't the case, but most are getting one.
How would
Okay.
the kids get that?
Any questions on large play structures? Okay. If you flip over, we've got some individual structures or individual events, and I'll just roll through those for you. Again, these first few, climbing is the theme. Climbing is very popular. The Matrix 4M was a very popular item. It is the triangular cone-shaped netting that is simply built for climbing, sitting, moving around. It does build strength, it builds dexterity and balance. At the same time, you can just kind of plop on one of the ropes and sit there as well. The hub with 6 wing nets is just another takeoff of a climber. You can see that it's got the multiple nets on the inside, and then the double web crawler, again, looks like 2 cobwebs of ropes. This is where a lot of the events are going with regard to climbing. Flip over again, the hoopla freestanding is another event that was an option that was chosen by some buildings. All of these that you see, at least one is going somewhere. If there was an item that wasn't chosen by any building, I simply removed it. There's no point in bringing it to you to show you something that wasn't chosen by any buildings. And we did have 1 or 2 events that nobody chose, so I just took it off of the list. The Revolution Inclusive Spinner is one that we've ordered and we have in in a few of our schools right now. This is an ADA compliant. It has a buckle on the seat, so you can put a child in and buckle in. You can stay on the outside, you can lay on the middle, you can sit in the seat. It is quite popular right now.
It is packed.
They don't-
You go to any
Has
of our
there
schools that have
any
them.
incidences of vomiting?
I was gonna say, they
Not
don't
yet.
allow
No
this
one- yeah,
after
no one
lunch,
over-
do they?
I'll tell you.
No one over
these
30 is
new,
allowed to get on.
Some of these new pieces
Events.
are just
Yeah,
packed when you
yeah.
go to the
There's a lot of
schools.
excitement around them, that's
Yeah.
for sure. And the last page is something that we bundled together as a single unit. So the challenge ladder, which is, you can see there's a letter A next to those top 2, which is basically the bars. The vertical ladder, which has the little B next to it, and then letter C, the parallel bars. These are all individual items that you can build an entire sort of area. What we decided to do was put the 3 of them together, and we said to the buildings, you don't have to choose one of these. You would get, this is a package deal.
Right.
You're going to get all 3 of these pieces, and you can have sort of a little like climbing parallel bar muscle type unit, which is similar to some of the old units that we have. I think Riley has one and Roosevelt has one. Currently, this is probably a little bigger with a little more pieces to it, but it's similar to that idea.
Quick question, on the letter A, how tall is that? Like, I was looking at one of these other ones, just thinking, with the little kids, how do they get, there was nothing to climb up on, like back on the, if you go back to that pirate ship or the slide ship, is that, the height of that, you wouldn't need to have a step up, something to step up to reach one of the rungs?
I don't have
we don't-
the measurement.
specs, okay.
It's I don't have the measurement.
Just wondering, because
And I don't
with
even-
little kids, like they get down there and they can't get up and.
I mean, again, these are all rated ages 5 through 12, so
Okay.
not every
The
single event.
height variances.
Not every single event might necessarily be appropriate for a
For them.
5-year-old.
Okay.
That a 10-year-old would be very appropriate to be on. But they grow into them as well. I
Okay.
mean, if you think about a K4 that has their K1 and 2 on an event, and many of them, the elementaries, and then when they have the whole school recess in the afternoon, they may not differentiate. That's when they differentiate. I'm sorry, the other way around. But if they have broken up recesses at lunch, They could potentially be on whichever, but they're all rated for those ages. I guess it just depends on, can you reach it or not?
It's all good. I'm just thinking, I used to be a
Yeah.
noon monitor, and I know multiple times, I'm like trying to get these kids up there,
You
and
gotta
it's
get
like,
your workout somehow too.
I guess so.
Well, one of the things that I can mention, Mrs. Bradford, is that with those, with these new structures, is we'll have the new ground cover, which provides about 8 to 9 inches.
For jumping up.
That will come
some.
off, come from the ground, and then, most of the time, students can leap up. So again, there may be some that are more accessible to, our youngest
Yes.
learners as
And
opposed
then
to
these are
others.
maybe for
But
the
that-
older
That
ones.
ground cover does provide just a bit of a boost as well.
Okay.
So I wanted to show the items, just to give you a feel for what's,
really
what's
nice.
coming. There was a lot of work done with regard to, narrowing and then buildings, narrowing it further. Now we're gonna narrow color schemes and have buildings make those choices. But that's very much aside from the actual purchase. That doesn't, whatever colors they choose isn't gonna change. So if I can convert over to the packet, we do have, I did give you a total bid sheet with the breakdown for each building, along with my memo. We are looking to go through Play Power LT Farmington Incorporated, and that's care of Great Lakes Recreation. Great Lakes is the group that actually has been walking the schools, seeing placement, taking that information. This is the same group that we got the 4 pieces for Webster, Kennedy, Grant, and Buchanan. And the pricing is from the National Joint Powers Alliance, so that is the cooperative contract. And that includes ground covers, that includes installation, et cetera. We did speak to the folks when we talked to the study session regarding the installation. They do promise to have obviously multiple groups with regard to installation, multiple teams. Now, they can't say we're 100% certainty that we're going to have 4 because they struggle with, like everybody else, to get groups in. But essentially, a good ballpark for a building would probably be 5 to 6 days to install the equipment. So if you're looking at about a week, obviously every crew that they bring
Gonna
in,
take a while.
it cuts it in half. If you go from 1 crew to 2, you're cutting your timeline in half. So they're saying that we will have the manpower. I had asked, can you help me out here with how many crews you do believe? We've been doing back and forth with the emails. I haven't gotten them to commit, but I don't know if I would commit either. Because if they say in an email,
Right.
I'm going to have 4 crews, and they end up with 3, now we're mad at them. But they do have multiple crews. They promise that they will have, on site, on time. They were very good once the manufacturing. The last one was late, but that wasn't their fault. That was the manufacturer who was delayed. Because each one of these pieces is not sitting on a shelf somewhere. They are built
Yes.
as we order them with the colors, et cetera. So these need to be manufactured, and then they are freighted here. They'll come to this, to the board office, to the warehouse, and they'll be
And then they have to be
stored
all
here,
sent out.
and then taken building by building and staged and installed at the site by each crew as they work through the schedule. Okay. And so just one more piece, if I could jump in. I'm recommending an 8% contingency on this. We do this often with some of our bond and sinking fund work whenever we're working with land. You heard Mr. Smith talking about a 15% when you're digging in and doing parking lots. Now, we don't need, I believe, 15% for this, but if we happen to be working and there is crushed drainage underneath, or there's reason to change out a part or et cetera, we would want to make sure that we have a contingency. And if the board only approves the exact amount that was done in this original quote,
Right.
our hands may be tied. So that 8% would come to $153,383. So I would recommend and ask the board, if you so choose to vote on this next week, it would be in the amount of $2,070,665.80. That would be including an 8% contingency.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yeah, my question was, when, I know it'll take time to install, but when would they be ready to start installing, in the spring?
Well, it's a good question, and I would say that we've been aiming as a spring And the answer with almost everything is it depends, in that
Yeah.
it depends on what kind of winter we
And
have.
the weather.
Because with the frost laws, those are local controlled
yes.
frost laws with large
Okay.
rigs. If they're not gonna allow those rigs to come in, we'll be at their mercy, which might be March, which might be April.
Right.
If it's not a bad winter,
Maybe
those,
sooner.
those frost laws may not be in effect the same way.
Okay, and just a follow-up, do we have space to hold when they bring it in?
Yes.
You know where you're gonna be able to put that?
Yeah, here,
Okay.
the warehouse area.
And you have room for that?
Yes.
Okay.
And a lot of it would frankly would be staged outside of the warehouse. I mean, this is outdoor equipment. It doesn't need to be covered,
okay.
so they can.
Oh, they could put it out
Yeah,
there.
because what they do when they go to a site is they just lay it down there
Yeah.
because it takes them several days. So we'll save on freight by bringing it here,
Yeah.
and then
It's
having
in
the
parts
guys
though,
move.
right? They're not you wouldn't get the giant, they're
But
pieces and parts.
Those big pieces, that's
Yeah.
what takes them so long, is
Okay.
it's gonna be those structures.
Mrs. Jarvis.
I noticed there's a Little Tykes commercial logo on here. Is this Little Tykes equipment?
Yeah, Little Tykes Commercial is the manufacturer, and
Little
then.
Tykes Residential for family use has a lifetime warranty. Every piece has an 800 number on it, and if something goes wrong, you call that number and they send you the replacement. Is that true for the commercial as well?
I'd have to confirm their warranty, but I don't believe it's lifetime because we have some Little Tykes now, and it's not, automatically, because after a certain number of years, maybe about 10-ish or maybe a little more, some of the parts are no longer made available. That becomes some of the issue when you have plate structures for many, many years, like some of ours currently are, that we're going to be replacing. You struggle to get the parts. So if you break a piece, you have to live with the broken piece. So they do warranty, but they move on to the structures they make, so they don't necessarily have readily available the parts. I'll confirm with the folks at Great Lakes who we've been emailing with, who gave us the quote, and ask for the specifics, and we'll get it for the update for you, okay?
Any other questions? We all good to put this on regular?
So we are thrilled to be bringing this forward, and I appreciate Mr. Francis and Mrs. Scott's leadership on this, and the committee really actually was together again today, narrowing down the color combinations. There are quite a few factors that go into this. I think one of the key elements, beyond the fact that we continue to be tremendously grateful to our community for the passage of the bond, because as Mr. Francis has referred, these types of purchases in this substantial nature are really once-in-a-generation purchases. And so we expect that this will last for quite a while, and we know that there will be hundreds and hundreds of children that will get a lot of great use out of these. But as you plan for that, we certainly take a look at, again, current usage, proposed usage of, students with special needs, and the makeup of the committee allowed for us really to garner some of that feedback, which I think was essential. And then from there, when they narrowed this down, again, rather than saying to schools, here are, and having, we've done this together, right, in PTA,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Building
We've tried to,
structures.
you start with a whole catalog and you try to figure out where to go. So what the team did is they really made this manageable for schools. And I think individual visits were made to every school.
Repeatedly.
Sat down and
That's nice.
multiple times, but in the selection process to say, here are all of the choices, think about what would serve your students and your community. And so really, the process for the schools was streamlined considerably by the work of this group. So I know folks have been asking quite a bit, when are we going to get the equipment and when can that be in? And there's a reason why they took this amount of time. It's a $2 million purchase. Again, we're servicing 16 different school sites, and that really is a significant undertaking, but we are so excited to see these come alive and hopefully be in place in the spring, and in some cases may bleed into the summer, but certainly by the start of next school year, everyone will be able to start enjoying them. So,
It is exciting
thank you.
to work with them, but we did not want to rush it. I mean, you want to have, if it's going to last that long,
Right.
you want to have
Make sure
something.
it's right.
That's
Right, thorough and be thorough.
The one thing I'd like to add is, I know that we have so many strong and active PTAs and generous PTAs throughout. one of the ideas, since we were talking about, this would be the minimum here, this would be the minimum here, we know that PTAs might want to add to this. What we want to do once these playgrounds are set and the installations that we do, et cetera, is then start working with the buildings to say, if your PTA wants to do something, let them talk to a subset of the committee. Someone like Mr. Lau, Mrs. Scott, myself will still be together, and we can say, let us know what you're thinking of getting, let us know how much you want to spend, work with us, and we can then start doing placements in appropriate areas versus a random thing that just shows up, and it was best of intention and generosity, but it's just sort of there. Our idea is to say, maybe we talk about doing something that might work well near the walking area. Like, do we have some events that go around the walking track or the walking path or whatever the case may be? So we are going to want to ask buildings to not just sort of, to do this in a very thoughtful, controlled, planned manner, and then just start dotting it with other items. We want to say, hey, let's make your building, your school, something that it's cohesive, and where would we place something that you want to do? So that would be our plan moving forward, is to sort of keep that cohesive nature going on into the future. Because of course we don't want to say no if somebody wants to get get some equipment, so we want to work with that.
All right. With that, we'll move on to item 5D, addendum to Livonia City Soccer Club lease.
Yes. I had spoken with the group last study session with the board regarding our desire to put a second addendum on the Livonia City Soccer lease that we have at Nigiero. Giving a little quick background, at one time before Nigiero had become Nigiero and Taylor was empty, the city, Livonia City Soccer, had used some storage area, some office area, the main office of what the school is now, and the gymnasium. They had a much larger area. There wasn't a school in that building. They have considerably scaled back. They've merged with the Hawks and the Wolves, so it's a very different landscape, and all they're using right now is the gymnasium at Nigiero. And the way the original lease from several years back still read, it didn't have any times or days, et cetera, because it was theirs all the time, because they were the only ones in there. We did work together and narrowed down the times that they actually use it. We put that into the letter 1A in the addendum. At this point, I do want to update the board. I don't have the finalized version. We're still conversing about the minimum notice. Our conversation was, this is a school program. We do want to make sure, if not just to bump you for the sake of bumping you because we feel like doing something on a Tuesday night in that gymnasium, but if something incidental came up that we had no idea was going to come up, giving them some notice to say the school will need it at that time, even though that's normally when you have it. So they understand that. We've already worked out, Mr. DeLuca at Nigiero and Mr. Shingledecker with the soccer group have already worked out the few days that there would be the need for this year. This is more of a fail-safe of, we had no idea that we've never had this function before, but it had to come up. So we're still talking about how much notice that is appropriate for them, because they also say, we have a program, we have children that are paying to come to do something. We don't want it to be, twice a week you guys now are starting to tell us, you give us a few days notice and we're out of here. And I understand that they want to protect what they're doing. So I think that we're going to have something before you vote on it next week, because we were actually emailing just before the board meeting, trying to figure out how many days notice and how many maybe days maximum that this could happen in a given year, which I think is fair as well, to say, we're not going to do this 50 times throughout the course of a year. I don't think that's an unfair request. So I'll get those, and if I don't have them in a timely manner for next week, we'll just put this onto the next one. But I think I'm right there. We keep talking back and forth. So I didn't want to derail tonight's committee meeting and just pull this. I wanted to still go through the tenets of what you have here. The times are on here. The days of the week are on here. What I'm going to get you as soon as we come to an agreement is how many days notice and how many total days it could happen in a given school year. If there's anything that you feel is too much or not enough, I mean, let me know, but I really think in the past, and even now, there's only a few days that conflict, because frankly, they don't use the gym in the fall and in the spring when the weather's nice, they go outside for their practices. So it's mostly when the weather turns, well, I was gonna say like this, but it's pretty nice now too. But generally speaking, it would, around this time of year, they're inside.
One of the reasons I think we want to continue to adhere, however, to our board policy, which says that our facilities, first and foremost, our schools, are utilized for the purpose of our K-12 programs, our pre-K, post-secondary programs run by Livonia Public Schools. And so, again, as Mr. Francis stated, this lease was put into place when this was not a school. So we generally would not have an elementary school where the gym was utilized Monday through Friday from 5 to 10 p.m.
Right.
So you would not normally have that conflict. So this is a bit unique. We certainly, this group, they've been great partners with us, and we know that we have many, many families who participate in the programs, and we're very happy to continue to work with them. We also want to be respectful that we have a growing program at Nijiir Elementary, and one of the highlights of the program are the community activities that they host throughout the year. And they do a number of programs where they invite in their families and their communities. So while we certainly want to be respectful and cognizant of our lessees, we also want to realize that we have a changing situation at this particular location as well, because we now have a school that has many activities on a regular basis. So we're confident we'll be able to come up with that agreement. But I think it's certainly worthy of having that dialogue that Mr. Francis is having right now, so that we're all clear on both ends.
And I'm not going to force it in to make sure we have it for Monday, is my point. If we keep talking and can't agree, then it is what it is. You're not going to be able to sign something, they're not going to sign something that isn't done. So just giving you the heads up that if it's not on next week's agenda, it's because we were still working on it. But I think we're close.
Mrs. Frank.
Just for future planning, is there any thought for next year to possibly move, I know they've been a long-term tenant in this building, but to move them maybe to a CAS that doesn't have current students or something like that to maybe do both, because it is so important to build that community environment in the evenings. Could we do something like that in the future, or?
It's certainly, once the lease itself is up, it's certainly something that we can talk with them about and take a look at, whether or not how impactful it is on their program and how impactful it is on the school.
Any other questions? President Burton.
I appreciate you discussing the blank that was there, because that was going to be one of my questions. It's hard to sign a fill in the blank. My next question came with. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. My next question came in with the next item. Item B, access to one of the landlord's 3 high school turf fields as assigned by the tenant to the landlord. My question to you, I know this has been an ongoing agreement. Just how is that portion going?
It's been fine. They do it usually through community ed, and they get it scheduled in, and it's that part I haven't heard any concerns with the turf fields. And that is a piece the only pieces that are different are what I have in bold, and that's only up in that 1A. That has been in there, and to answer your question, I haven't heard any concerns.
So if we haven't heard any concerns, then it's likely going well. And obviously, this too is that the high schools schedule out their games first, and then the soccer club can fill in some of the blanks.
Right, and that's taking something that's connected to other discussions we've had. That's the beauty of a turf field, is you couldn't do that with the grass and have all these soccer games and all these different events occurring on them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? The only thing I noticed, Mr. Francis, is the second bolded sentence. It says the district preserves the right. I think this should be reserves.
Yeah, I took it actually from board policy. It was one of the administrative.
Is that the word we
reserves?
use?
Yeah, it wants to preserve the right to be able to use them. Yeah.
That's just very funny language in a lease.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying, because it sounds like it should be reserved. I kept what was written in the administrative procedures. I think that I can only guess, I mean, you're the attorney, but I would only guess that it was, they always want to preserve that with any agreement they make. They want to preserve the right to be able to use it, and that's what we're trying to do by having this language.
If it's in the administrative procedure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, any other questions? So we will assuming that we get the language worked out, we'll have this on.
Sure, I would ask that to put it on, and then we'll have Jill pull if needed.
Everybody good with that? Okay.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Francis.
Thank
and
you. Thank you.
President
Wow.
Reagan.
Thank you.
That concludes Building and Site.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 6, Policy Committee, and I will turn the meeting over to Mrs. Frank.
Good evening, thank you, ladies. We have some board policies to update and administrative procedures that we're going to update. And we're going to start with policy IFC. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I would like to share the proposed revisions to Board Policy IFC. This policy encompasses IFAA, which was shared at the study session last week. IFC is instructional materials, textbooks, and equipment selection and adoption. This was updated previously, and we determined that by integrating the textbook selection adoption policy and administrative procedures with this current policy was necessary. So as you can see on the board policy, we added actually in the word textbook, so we broadened this to include textbook and equipment and instructional material selection and adoptions. And then the red paragraph is the portion from IFAA that we are adding in about how a process of periodically reviewing materials by a committee of teachers after making such studies, serving as professional specialists in their instructional fields. Members of these committees will submit their recommendations through appropriate channels to the superintendent. With the superintendent's approval, recommendations will then be submitted to the Board of Education for approval after following the guidelines outlined in the administrative procedures. So this is for primary textbooks and instructional materials. I know we talked last time about planning ahead for many years to come, that it might not be a book itself, could be instructional materials, but at this point, we want to make sure we encompass it all. And then the last change is just adding administrator to building principal, because we currently do have building administrators. Any questions on the policy? And then the administrative procedures stay the same as they were last week, shared at study session. What we did is we combined them into one administrative procedure. So the first section is the procedure for identifying materials for adoption and the process that the coordinators go through. They actually have a more in-depth procedures that they use, but this outlines the steps that they follow. And then on the third page of the administrative procedures, we incorporated the access to instructional materials and criticism of instructional materials. They were separate administrative procedures, since it's all about reviewing and adopting instructional and textbook materials to be used in schools.
So then will we then be deleting IFAA?
We will.
Thank you.
Anything else?
So I'd like to submit this for board policy revision for your consideration and recommend that it be brought forward for its first reading at the next board meeting.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Is there any way in our voting meeting packet that we don't include the administrative procedure, so that we don't give the sort of signal that this is something that the board is responsible for?
I don't think that it would appear, because we won't be voting on that.
Okay, it's been attached, I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't at that point. Okay.
Now, generally,
Good point.
we would
Thank
give
you.
you a clean final copy. If you would like to have that, we can, or we can just put that separately in your packet, but not in the meeting packet.
I would prefer
Sure.
it to be
So we,
separate.
obviously, this one has the strike-throughs, the blue
Right.
is the current, the red is
Right.
the proposed, and then black for the policy. So we like at the committee meeting for you to see where all those changes
Right.
are.
Right.
And then in your final packet, you would normally get just the final
Yeah.
clean version.
Yeah.
So what we could do is include in the board meeting packet, the policy. We'll then include the administrative procedures, just so you have,
Separately.
for your records, one
Good idea.
final clean copy. We'll just include that in your normal board packet that is brought to you on Thursdays.
I think that would make it less confusing if someone else is looking at the packet.
Sounds great. President Burton?
Do we even need a final copy of the administrative procedure?
I do.
I don't for myself.
Save the trees.
And
Save the trees.
I mean,
because it'll be found on the website as soon as,
Oh,
well,
yeah,
it'll be
let's-
found as soon as
yeah,
you
yeah.
administrate.
Yeah, let's just do
yeah,
it that
I'm
way.
good. I agree.
Are you comfortable with that?
Yep,
Okay,
That's
so
fine.
we'll just include the board policy in the packet.
perfect.
And then, once that process is complete, actually, we can move forward with the administrative procedures and go ahead and modify those and begin that process. Because as you know, very excitingly, we have 4 different textbook adoption committees, which are embarking on their work this year, thanks to the Wayne County
good.
Enhancement Millage.
That is good.
It's timely to have this updated information to them.
Yes.
Thank you for your work on that.
Oh, thank you.
Anything
Thank you
else?
for your support.
Thank you. And now Mrs. Scott is going to come up and talk to us about JBC, Board Policy JBCB and Administrative Procedure JBCB.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We are looking at Board Policy JBCB, and we continue to identify the language in our board policy that needs to be updated and in accordance to the laws and reflecting our current practices. So, as we discussed this at the study session last week, I'll read through the changes for Board Policy JBCB, non-resident students. The first paragraph remains the same in the black print. The red, in the second paragraph, the Board of Education will consider out-of-district school of choice students in specialized programs and through limited school of choice options only if doing so benefits resident students by preserving programs. This is new language in this policy. The third paragraph remains the same. The tuition definition, we're striking through that because this definition is found in the law. And the law is referenced here in the final paragraph for JBCB with tuition fees. We took that from JBCBA, which you will find probably about 2 pages in, possibly. And so this particular board policy will be eliminated and then just be combined and integrated into JBCB. Okay?
Yeah, 3 times fast.
I know it, exactly. And then, of course, there's the administrative procedures that we went through, and there's just very few minor changes, just reflecting some language, some title changes, this sort of thing. So like in numbers 1, 2, and 3, there's absolutely no changes. In number 4, the child accounting office, we changed that to the pupil accounting office. Number 5, there's no changes. Number 6, decided that where it says semester, that now since we have our elementary on a trimester basis and then our secondary on a semester basis, that we needed to be able to make sure that wherever it says semester in paragraph or number 6, that it is as defined by the secondary calendar, so that we're all in the same understanding. Number 7, again, just changing the name of the child accounting office to pupil accounting office. Number 8 is just reflecting the programs that we have now and their names with MOCI, ASD, Work Skills, and Visually Impaired programs. And then there are no other further changes in numbers 9 and 10. Okay. And then the only other change is there are 2 exhibits currently, and that go along with our registration materials. And These registration materials are found on our website, and periodically there are changes that need to be reflected with these, so we are eliminating them from the board policy. And if parents, would like to refer to them, they're always found on our website. That way, though, we can make those changes very readily and not need to come and tell you and then go back. We can just quickly do that. So, and then we would like to bring these to the regular board meeting for the first reading.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Great. Any questions on those?
No.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott.
Thank you.
And that concludes processing.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 7, Legislative Committee, and I will be turning the meeting over to Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Burton. We have some bills to take a look at and to be updated on, and we'll turn to Superintendent Oquist for that information.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. At our study session, we had discussion with regard to Senate Bills 584, 585, and 586 related to the more readily referred to as the legislation regarding guns in schools. As you know, when we discussed that legislation, we discussed the concerns that we had held with regard to the potential for additional firearms being brought into our school setting. As we've all indicated on multiple occasions, and certainly by our actions, the safety and security of our students is of paramount importance, as is the guidance of local control over our board policy. And these bills look to impact both of those items. And so as we have referred to many updates that have come to us legislatively, both through the Board of Education's body, which we often refer to on legislative items, MASB, as well as a number of other state agencies, and certainly discussions amongst our team here. We had discussed the importance of having our voice heard as a school district who cares deeply about its students and also about the ability to set policy as determined and appropriate for our district by our locally elected Board of Education. And so we had discussed whether or not it would be appropriate to communicate our concerns regarding this legislation directly to our legislators, directly to the governor, in the form of a resolution, in the form of a letter, perhaps signed by the entire board and myself on behalf of the district, or whether or not we would make individual contact on this legislation. So it's not unusual, as you know, we take a look at all legislation impacting our schools, and in some cases are very active advocates with regard to specific legislation, and other times it may be something where we support legislation or perhaps are suggesting an amendment, perhaps not opposition. In this particular case, what I've shared with you today, and that I'd like to review this evening, is a proposed draft of a Board of Education resolution. Now, as you know, we don't have a voting meeting until 2 weeks from this evening. And this is the period of time currently when our legislature is taking a look at these particular Senate bills. So we have a few options. I'd like to certainly discuss the contents of this, and then we can talk about whether or not this is something that the board is desirous of supporting with changes, whether or not you'd like to go forward with a formal resolution, or whether or not you think it's sufficient for us to, I could certainly take the contents of the resolution that I've drafted and put that in the form of a letter that we could use to communicate as well. So I'd like to share that portions of this resolution came from the proposed resolution from MASB, also from 2 other organizations from whom I receive legislative updates, etc. And then I've also added some items that you may see familiar at the top of the resolution, the first few items with regard to Livonia Public Schools in particular, and our focus on safety and security and well-being of our students based on the conversation we had at our study session. And so this is meant to be reflective of some of the feedback that our team discussed, which is the commitment that our district already shows in the form of our bond safety and security enhancements to which we've committed, the resource personnel that we fund as part of our budget annually locally, not with other sources, but that we choose to have be part of our budget each year with regard to the police liaison officers and the security personnel, and then certainly things like staff safety awareness training that takes place annually, et cetera. So part of the importance of having that included at the start of the resolution was to indicate that we already take this responsibility with great care and diligence, and we've shown our commitment both by our allocation of resources and our allocation of time and planning with regard to our bond renovations. So that really covers the first three portions of the resolution. The next four are related to laying out for the reader of this resolution or this communication the current laws and what is allowable. And the reason that that's important is if you were to walk into this situation for the first time without any background knowledge, it would be important to understand what the federal law permits, what the state law permits, and then the challenge that would take place if these laws were then enacted. And so really the intent was to lay out what is currently in place and where that provides a challenge with regard to the new legislation. It then moves on to reference the most recent decision by the courts, which states that districts have the authority to create policies that ban the possession of firearms on school property and at school-sponsored events. And as you know, as a board, it is certainly one of your main responsibilities and one that this board has regularly taken very, very seriously. And so the ability to continue to have local control over that issue, which would be impacted by Senate Bill 586, was, I know, of great concern to all of you and certainly to the district. So then it again goes into a bit more detail with regard to these bills themselves and what it would allow or not allow, and then what the Senate passed on November 8th with regard to these bills and how that changed the permitting of carrying concealed weapons on school grounds. And then we move into the fact that the governor has in the past asserted that legislation should include an opt-out so that local school boards may decide whether they want to permit weapons or opt out to make the school grounds a weapons-free school zone. So that it was important that we have that portion in the resolution as well, as that speaks specifically to the provisions that would not be allowed under 586. So again, it would state that we oppose Senate Bills 584 to 586 and urges the local lawmakers and governor to allow local school boards to enact their own policies regarding weapons on school grounds, and that if it were passed through the legislative bodies, that the governor is encouraged to veto this legislation. So that gives you a general overview. Certainly, we can discuss any and all elements of this resolution. I just wanted to give you the general overview of what we were trying to communicate and see if that captures some of the discussion we had, or if you feel that there are other areas to emphasize or areas to de-emphasize in the communication.
Liz?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just busy reading. Dan?
I think you did a very nice job of really communicating several different things about our district, like you said, where we are and what the concerns are. So for me, I think this is, if someone were to look at this and read this, I think they kind of have a good understanding of what's happening now and what our thoughts are of what should happen. Because of that, I like this resolution quite a bit. I think you emphasized the right points in this, and I would support this as a resolution or a letter or whatever the board would like to do.
Thank you. Tammy?
So, Mr. Johnson just briefly mentioned this, and if I'm off base, then please let me know, but he talked about last week that we're creating a lot of soft targets with these laws. And I would have to agree, there have been a couple of events that I have not participated in specifically because I felt like I was putting myself into a position where I was a soft target, and it would be very easy for an active shooter to come in and, do a lot of damage. So I guess, so I agree with what Mr. Johnson said about we're creating soft targets. But I did a lot of thinking about, creating a soft target versus no guns in our schools. And I still, after taking that into consideration, firmly believe that guns don't have any place in our schools. And I just was going to go through a couple of, if we're looking for parents to have guns in schools, that's sort of a random event. And why they're bringing their guns into the school is, sometimes we want to think that, they have the best intentions and that they've all, but I don't feel like we should be letting intentionally letting individuals into our school with firearms. And it's been brought up that if they have a concealed weapon, there's no way for us to know. I thought about, if the staff members were carrying weapons, I would much rather see our staff members focusing on getting our kids into lockdown, into safe zones, than to be thinking, should I be running down the hall trying to shoot at the bad guy kind of thing. What's the availability, of someone, especially in some of our larger buildings, if the active shooter's on one, what are the chances that they're going to be there at that same moment to be able to defend the kids with a firearm? And I think that we've taken some safeguarding measures like the secure vestibules and buzzing people in and trying to lock down our buildings where we're doing the most that we can to keep the active shooters out of the buildings, or whatever scenario we might want to have ourselves armed in. And, our staff is all trained on the lockdowns and what happens if there's an active shooter, and if there's an active shooter in the area, or sometimes it's just a police situation in the area. Get the kids inside, we lock them down. That's, not to say that, this might be nice to have the school safety pack-in out on the playground because, the kids are out in the open and there is no, we don't have all that extra security for them when they're out on the playground. But, again, the potential, I think, for an accident to happen, especially with the small kids, and even, teenagers and stuff, they're all invincible, right? They don't have any of that fear that we have, and they're very curious, and they want to know how things work. I guess those are, I'm all for this resolution, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about, thinking through that soft target. Because, like I said, I have made choices not to do things because of that fact. But still thinking through that process, I'm still in favor of the resolution.
Mrs. Bradford?
I really like the resolution as it's written. I like how it's laid out and in the format it's laid out in. The most concerning part for me for the Senate bill, for these bills, is Senate Bill 586. that would prohibit a local school board from being able to make a decision on whether or not we want weapons in the building. That, to me, is the most important part of this piece, because that just takes away our local control. If the state wants to go ahead and pass Senate Bill 584 and go ahead and do that, I think that's their prerogative. But I think what's concerning most is the taking away of our decision to decide how we want to operate our buildings and how we want to go about it. So, and it's covered in this resolution. I'm not a gun person, so it's hard for me to understand the opposite viewpoint, but I really appreciate everybody's viewpoint on why they do think, and I totally understand why they would think it would be logical for us to bring weapons into a building. However, when I really discern what's going on, I just don't understand why we would allow weapons in. I understand we're soft, I get that, but I guess I would go back and say, if this is the case, why aren't our legislators passing their laws so that on their floor, the legislative floor, people can conceal carry? If you're not allowing that on your floor in the legislature, why would we allow it in our schools? I just think it's dangerous. I think there's more to be concerned about allowing people with weapons concealed, anybody, even if you take a course, an 8-hour course. There's lots of different factors on people coming into our buildings with weapons, and it's safety is the utmost importance for our students. And so I would very much support the resolution as it reads. And that's just my opinion.
President Burton.
This is such an important topic for our public. Do I have the agreement of the board that we could read this resolution aloud so that the public can hear what it is specifically we're talking about?
Absolutely.
Is anybody else would like to do that, or if not,
Sure.
I'm happy to.
Or should we just, in pieces, go around, each person reads a section?
I think it's better if just one person
Okay.
does it. I think it.
Reads better?
I'm happy to go ahead and do it.
Why don't you?
Livonia Public Schools opposition to Senate Bills 584 through 586, Board of Education Resolution. Whereas a public school district is tasked with providing for the safety and welfare of its students and to educate students in a safe and nurturing environment. And whereas Livonia Public Schools takes this aforementioned responsibility with great commitment and dedication to the students and staff entrusted to us. And whereas Livonia Public Schools has exhibited its belief that school safety is of primary importance, as illustrated by the district's commitment to bond-related safety and security enhancements, staff safety awareness training, police liaison officers, and security personnel servicing our schools. And whereas the Federal Gun-Free School Zones Act prohibits possession of a firearm in a school zone, but exempts an individual licensed to carry a firearm under state law. Whereas Michigan Weapons-Free School Zone Act similarly prohibits possession of a firearm on school property, but exempts an individual licensed to carry a firearm under state law, and the state laws are cited in both of those examples. Whereas the Michigan Concealed Pistol Licensing Act prohibits an individual with a concealed pistol license from carrying a concealed pistol on school property, with the state law cited. Whereas the state of Michigan has not enacted legislation expressly prohibiting individuals who possess a valid concealed pistol license, or CPL, from openly carrying firearms in areas otherwise designated as gun-free school zones. Whereas the Michigan Gun Owners Incorporated versus Ann Arbor Public Schools, with the appropriate legal citing, and Michigan Open Carry versus Clio Area School District, appropriate legal citing, the Michigan Court of Appeals found that the school districts have the authority to promulgate policies that banned the possession of firearms on school property and at school-sponsored events. And whereas Senate Bill 584 would allow an individual with a concealed pistol license to request a special endorsement to carry a concealed firearm into no carry zones, such as schools, daycares, and stadiums, with only a minimal amount of additional training. And whereas Senate Bill 586 would prohibit local boards of education decisions on whether or not to allow weapons on school property by amending Public Act 319 of 1990 to include a school district, a community college district, and a public library in the list of public entities that are prohibited from enacting firearms regulations stricter than any federal or state law. And whereas Senate Bill 586 would not allow a district to set policies regarding firearms except for their own students and staff, this would not cover visiting students or staff for extracurriculars or those who participate in shared time programs. And whereas on November 8, 2017, the Michigan Senate passed Senate Bills 584 through 586, which prohibit open carry and permit concealed carry on school grounds, daycare centers, sports arenas, large concert halls, taverns, places of worship, hospitals, college dorms or classrooms, and casinos for concealed pistol license holders with extended training. Whereas Governor Rick Snyder has asserted in the past that legislation should include an opt-out so that local school boards may decide whether they want to permit weapons or opt out to make the school grounds a weapon-free school zone. Now therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools opposes Senate Bill 584 through 586 and urges lawmakers and the governor to allow local school boards to enact their own policies regarding weapons on school grounds. And be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution should be sent to Governor Rick Snyder, encouraging him to veto this legislation should it pass through the legislative bodies.
Thank you, President Burton.
Thank you for allowing me to do that, and I appreciate the attention of folks who wanted to listen to all of that detail, but I feel it is important if you're following this issue that you know specifically exactly what we're talking about here at this table tonight. As far as my own opinions, I definitely understand both sides, and I appreciate the fact that in this discussion, I believe that everyone who has an opinion on it is coming to the table, in whatever their table is, with the concept that their thought is going to make the schools most safe. And I want that to be known right off the bat. I don't believe anyone's coming to the table with saying anything other than that. And I believe that that's why folks are so passionate about this, because we believe that one way versus the other, and bottom line, we have to choose one way versus the other, is going to be the most safe for our citizens, especially our children. Bottom line, this board is charged with either setting a policy or certainly encouraging action that would allow us to set policy on this issue. I agree with Mrs. Bradford and others tonight who have spoken to the fact that one of the most concerning pieces is that this legislation would take away local control from making this decision. There may be districts that decide that the safest way to handle this situation is to allow their citizens to carry weapons into their schools. There may be districts that decide the complete opposite. But the very dangerous thing is this is stripping us of that right, which I absolutely oppose. My personal opinion on second and apart from that, I believe that the local control absolutely needs to stay. This needs to be a decision that our local district needs to be able to make. Separate and apart from that, I recognize, as Mrs. Bonifield has said, there is a danger of soft zones. We have answered that to the degree that we are able with our secure vestibules, our lockdowns of our schools during the school day, with our security personnel and the various means that they have. I believe not even all of our board is fully aware of all of the security implications that they have at their disposal, and I don't believe we need to. They need to know that, and frankly, that needs to not be completely fully public in order to keep our schools as safe as possible. But let it be said that we have extensive security measures in place. They're not free, and we have set aside a great deal of effort, money, logistics in order to make sure that our schools are as safe as we can humanly make them. I recognize, too, that, yes, there's a chance that if someone is an active shooter in a building, there's a thought process that if someone else had a gun, they could potentially try to counter that individual. However, I believe that chance is minimal compared to the chance that if we set policy that says people are allowed to bring guns into Livonia Public School, I can virtually guarantee by tomorrow morning we would have people carrying guns into Livonia Public Schools. And the most frightening thing is not the fact that they'd be carrying guns into Livonia Public Schools, is that we would not know who they were. And if we set the policy that guns are allowed in Livonia Public Schools, we lose the right to discriminate who is allowed to carry the gun into Livonia Public Schools and who is not. That is terrifying to me. We can't determine that you're in a good mood, you're in a bad mood, you're stable, you're unstable. We're not in a position to make that determination. Therefore, if we allowed guns in Livonia Public Schools, anybody who had the proper permit, we would have to allow to carry concealed into our schools. The fact that I would know that there are multiple people walking around in our schools armed, and we don't know who they are, and our security people do not know who they are, that to me is far more dangerous than the chance of an active shooter in a building. And I'm not saying that to minimize the horrificness that active shooters have caused, because it is horrific and it is terrifying. But if I have to weigh the two, I would say that if I were to vote on a policy that allowed weapons in our schools, I would guarantee I've got unknown people carrying weapons in my schools tomorrow, and I'm not comfortable with that. I think I recognize there's safety in either decision and danger in either decision, but I would have to opt on not allowing guns in our schools for those reasons. I also think it is very, very interesting and completely disheartening, as Mrs. Bradford stated, that the legislative floor is one area that has been carved out with the daycares and the casinos and the bars and so forth, where used to be that you could carry your guns, but now they have let the guns be carried into all of our areas, yet the legislative floor is still supposed to be now one of the very few gun-free zones. That needs to be a gun-free zone. There are good reasons for that, but I want my children to have the same amount of safety that my legislators have. That's it for me.
Tammy?
I think one of the points that we made is that we are not necessarily asking the legislature to disallow guns in the schools. We're asking that it's a choice. Because there may be some farming communities where, on November 15th, the kids all grab their shotguns and run out to the field. It's about choice. It's not about being anti-gun. And I, for one, just for the record, we're very much a hunting family. I don't have a problem with firearms. My parents have carry permits. So this is not, for me, an anti-gun issue. This, for me, is a safety issue, and mostly about choice. And like President Burton said, different communities are going to make different choices for a myriad of different reasons. Our choice is to try and put as many safety measures into place as we can. And in our community, there's not a lot of, I'm not going to say that. Okay, sorry.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. First of all, I want to thank you for putting together the resolution. I think it encompasses our discussion and put all of our thoughts together. I am concerned with soft zones, but not just schools. I mean, there are a lot of soft zones that have been carved out by the legislature, and I think Mrs. Burton and Mrs. Bradford were both very articulate in setting forth their feelings. I don't have a different feeling, and I'm confident that the security measures that we have taken in our schools, if not totally eliminating the risk, it's very, 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 very small. And I agree, the real problem that I have with this legislation is it strips us of our right to decide our policies within our school district. So I will support the resolution.
Thank you. Mr. Centers, you haven't said anything? Do you have comments?
He did at the
Oh, I'm
beginning.
sorry.
Yep.
First
I
one.
apologize.
Yeah, you jumped right in the pool.
Here. Any other comments? Mrs. Frank?
I agree with what Mr. Johnson said, and I think that this resolution is so appropriate and just really encompasses our conversation that we had last week. And I think, as President Burton said, we cannot teach kids unless they're safe, and that is as a parent. When I send my kids to school, I trust Livonia Public School to keep them safe to the best of their ability. And I think that when we look at this issue, we're not deciding right now, as Mr. Johnson said, we're not deciding right now what our policy is going to be. We are deciding that we want to decide what our policy is going to be. And I think that is what this resolution states so beautifully, that we want the right to have this discussion, to talk to our staff, to talk to our administrators, to talk to our parents, to be able to make the best decision. And so I think that this is a good policy. This is not something, and I think that as I hear this, it just, as a parent in our school district, I am so encouraged to know everyone is, like President Burton said, just safety is our biggest priority, and we want to have the best policy possible to keep our kids and our students safe, and our staff, and everyone who visits the building. I'm in and out of the buildings all the time, and so are lots and lots of people. And it's good because we have lots of visiting readers. We have lots of people who come in and enhance our children's education. But it's not just students and staff that are in our buildings day after day. It is a lot of people that come in and out for very good reasons that we need to have some kind of control and some kind of policies. So I also will support this resolution, and I thank you for putting it together.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. Just one more comment. We do have in the resolution the present status of the two cases that were at the Court of Appeals, and we need to all understand that it may, depending on what the Supreme Court does, they could take that right away for us to decide. They may overturn both of these cases and say, you don't have the right. It's all preempted by state law. So we just need to keep that in mind as we go through the process.
That's a very good point. Any other comments? President Burton?
And just for the benefit of the public, this is not an issue that this board has just now begun to look at. We have been watching it as individuals and for a very, very long time. We are trying to be as prudent as we can to make our schools as safe as possible. But we've been watching it very carefully. We've been talking to our legislators as appropriate. We've been doing everything that we can and doing it in a manner that we want to, that will encourage calm civility throughout this discussion. So I just want our public to know that this is not our first glance at this by a long shot. We've been watching this go through the court system for a few years now, and we just, speak for myself, I feel compelled at this point to take some action. Obviously, others do also because we're discussing it tonight. But I just don't want our public to think that we are just now taking a look at this.
Tammy?
So, I was a little bit distracted at the beginning of the conversation. I know that in order for us to send this to the state, we have to vote on this, correct? or no? Or can we
So
just, can we just
absolutely,
get a
I'm happy
consensus?
to review our options on this. So we, since we don't have a voting meeting for 2 weeks, 2 weeks until, from this evening, I could either put this in a formal letter and communication, which we can send off to the governor, and, or I could send this as a letter, I could send this as a draft resolution stating that, or a proposed resolution that will be going to our board to vote on December 18th, and then follow up with the final version once it's voted and signed. So we really have a couple of different options. I think and it sounds like it is the will of the group to have this communicated. So I do think it's important that something be sent off in the very near future, in the next 24 to 48 hours. So I'd be happy to do that in the form of a cover letter with referencing the proposed resolution that's coming forward, and then follow up with a formal resolution. If there's another suggestion, I'm happy to entertain that, but I do think we need to, if that is the will of the board, that we need to get something forward.
Tammy?
And we've done this on a couple other things. If we have a consensus on this, can we agree to send it in not in draft format, in final format, and then officially vote on it in 2 weeks? Or is that breaking protocol too much?
I don't believe we can send it as an official resolution until we do vote on it. However, what we could do perhaps is have 8 signatures on your cover letter, which would be yourself and the 7 board members.
With the proposed resolution
With the,
behind it.
exactly, with the proposed resolution, yeah. And with the points made in the letter,
Okay.
with our signatures on the letter and the resolution that we just did not feel,
Certainly.
that we did not want to wait in order to get to you.
Is that the comment you wanted to make?
Yes, thank you.
I think that sounds
I wanted to add one other thing. I agree with all of you, and you were so eloquent, President Burton. You gave me goosebumps. You summed it up so beautifully. But I also wanted to add that when our community voted in the bond, they knew that one major component of that bond was security for our
Yeah.
schools. And in passing that bond, they showed the support for that kind of security, not for security that involves concealed carry. And therefore, this to me represents also the voice of our community.
So if that's
All
the
right.
will of the board, I'll prepare this as a letter
Mhm.
with all of our signatures attached, and then create this as a proposed resolution that we'll bring forward on the 18th.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And
Thank
each
you so
person-
much.
Are we all set with?
That's all, unless you have.
That is it for tonight.
Alrighty.
Right.
Can I, millage, anything? Is it, have you heard any more?
I have not
about
heard
it?
any updates with regard to it being brought back forward. I mean, certainly it's still
Still
under
there.
serious
Working.
consideration, and I believe they're still, looking to move that forward at this time, and is not on the agenda to do so. However, we continue to monitor that. I know your voices have continued to have been heard on that legislation as well, which I think is extraordinarily impactful to us, and so we continue to advocate in that regard. But I've not heard any new action taking place.
The next item on our agenda is item 8, personnel. Mr. Centers.
I don't have anything, Steve. Would you like to add anything?
Mrs. Oquist, do you have
We do
anything
not.
personnel? That brings us to the end of our agenda for this evening. We will not have a board meeting next week, but we invite you to tune back in on December 18th for our next regular or voting meeting. We are now adjourned. Have a good evening.